Chapter 6:16. Xiao Bai, Xiao Huang, be careful. Qiuqiu, you have to keep an eye on the sky. Jiang Hai tightened his grip on his gun and whispered to the dogs beside him. Then he took a deep breath and walked into the forest in front of him. Today was the 29th of October. It was getting closer and closer to the end of October. Jiang Hai's manor was still as busy as ever. The cowboys looked after the cattle, the fishermen checked the movements of the underwater fish. Although the wine had already been stored in barrels, Aphrodite and the others were not idle. It was already late autumn and the vegetables in the garden had to be harvested. Winthrop was not like some cities in the south where vegetables could be grown all year round. Here, vegetables and food were only grown for one season. After the vegetables were picked, they were sent to the warehouse for storage. Basically, they were vegetables that were easy to store. For example, radishes, pumpkins, cabbages, sprouts, potatoes, sweet potatoes, cabbages, winter melons, and so on. These vegetables were Jiang Hai's winter food. They were placed in the special warehouse and the temperature could be lowered. It was just like the cellar that Jiang Hai's family dug to store vegetables when they lived in a bungalow. It was no problem to store them for one winter. However, Jiang Hai would feel a little uncomfortable if he did not eat fresh vegetables. He was already considering whether to build a greenhouse next spring. This way, he could eat fresh vegetables all year round. Moreover, he did not plant much and he did not sell them for money. Therefore, the fertility of the land should not be a problem. Because Aphrodite and the others had been preparing these vegetables recently, Littleya, Bernice, Daliana, and Marion would also help. In the whole manor, the only idle person should be Jiang Hai. Oh, there were also two idle people, Dulles Gerard and Connor Murphy. They were in the wine cellar every day, drinking red wine. According to their words, they wanted to know when this batch of red wine would be divided and what standard it was. Jiang Hai didn't understand these messy things. After all, there were specializations in this industry. As for Jiang Hai, a few days ago, when he went to prepare for Halloween, it was just a small episode. Recently, after waking up every morning, he went to help tie up the grass. It was almost winter and there were still a lot of things to prepare in the manor. But at around 9 o'clock in the morning, the cowboys all went to herd the cattle. Jiang Hai could not tie up the grass himself, so he had nothing to do. After staying at home for a few days, Jiang Hai suddenly remembered that he seemed to have said a few months ago that he wanted to see his own forest. He had not seen it for so long, so he could give it a try this time. When Jiang Hai first entered the forest, he was led by Robbins Garcia and Edouard Anderson. But now, Jiang Hai was much more powerful than he was a year ago. Not only had his physical fitness reached 4 times the human limit. His experience was also much stronger than before. This also gave him the courage to enter the forest alone. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai picked up his gun, put on his outdoor clothes, and left with Xiao Huang, Xiao Bai, and Qiuqiu. Recently, Dai Feng was transferred away by Azalina, and no one knew what he was doing mysteriously. When he passed by the swimming pool, the Greenland seal that Jiang Hai bought was playing happily with 2 dolphins. These 3 little guys, since coming to Jiang Hai's manor, really came to enjoy life. Every day, in addition to eating, playing, and sleeping, their days were quite good. But fortunately, they also knew that Jiang Hai was their master. When they saw Jiang Hai coming over, they all looked at Jiang Hai. After greeting them, Jiang Hai took the 2 dogs and an eagle into the forest. As soon as they entered the forest, the sky, which was originally quite bright outside, became a lot darker. This was also Jiang Hai's fault. This was because when Jiang Hai nourished the ranch, the forest was not left behind, and it was also bathed in the light of the spirit energy. The spirit energy could improve the pasture, cattle, and fish. Naturally, it could also improve these trees. In this year, these trees grew quite fast. Fortunately, the people in Jiang Hai's manor watched the trees grow every day and did not feel anything, and the people outside could not see the appearance of the forest. Otherwise, a botanist would find that the trees in Jiang Hai's manor grew better in 1 year than in 3 years in other places. Now, it was not an exaggeration to describe Jiang Hai's forest as leafy and lush. The leaves that sheltered the sun completely blocked the sun. Only spots of sunlight shone into the forest through the gaps of the top leaves. But even so, in the forest, the grass that was almost waist-high still blocked Jiang Hai's vision. Carrying the gun on his back, Jiang Hai picked up the cold-forged knife that he specially bought and began to cut the grass to open a path. Modern knives and ancient cold weapons were actually very different. The hardness of a knife mainly depended on the material and forging method. The abbreviation of this hardness was called HRC. It did not mean that the higher the hardness, the better the knife. If the hardness was high, the saber would be brittle. If the saber was flexible, the hardness would be low. This was inevitable. The cold weapons of ancient Wuxia could be said to be extremely well developed. The best sabers should be during the Tang and Song dynasties. However, after the Tang and Song dynasties, it was definitely a chaotic era. After the Tang dynasty, it was the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. After the Song dynasty, it was replaced by the Yuan dynasty, so these forging methods were not passed down. Although he was unwilling to admit it, the best knives in modern times were made by Japan, which followed the forging methods of the Tang dynasty. During the anti-Japanese war, the samurai swords of Japan were much better in quality than the knives used in China. Of course, now they were all made by machines, and the hardness could be as much as one wanted. The toughness of the average saber was between 50 and 60. This was also the best saber that could be bought. However, Jiang Hai's knife was different. His Nippon knife, also called the *********, was specially ordered by the manufacturer behind the outdoor goods store in the town. Its hardness was 65 HRC. Cutting iron nails and the like was not much harder than cutting a piece of wood. Moreover, it was very flexible and did not reflect light, because it was not only made of steel, but also some other metals to ensure its toughness. It was not an exaggeration to say that this knife could cut through hair. Jiang Hai's knife continued to swing. Soon, the grass in front of him fell down, giving him a path to move around. However, just when Jiang Hai was happily chopping, Chirps, who was flying in the air, suddenly screamed. Hearing its slightly panicked cry, Jiang Hai could not help but frown and instantly picked up the gun. And Goldie and Xiao Bai, who had been following him, suddenly crouched on the ground. Their noses kept moving, trying to smell something different, but unfortunately, they sniffed for a long time and did not find anything. They raised their heads with some doubts, but just as they raised their heads, Goldie suddenly pounced on Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai was also looking around, so he did not notice. In an instant, he was pushed down by Goldie. After being pushed down, Jiang Hai panicked for a moment, but he wasn't worried. After all, he knew that Goldie wouldn't harm him. But when he looked up, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He was wondering why he did not find any clues when he looked around. Even Goldie and Xiao Bai did not find anything, but Chirp saw it. It turned out that his enemy was coiled up in a tree at this time. Yes, coiled up in a tree, because it was a snake, a huge snake. *****, it's a water dragon, why is this thing here? Looking at the huge monster that was about 5 meters long coiled up in the tree and looking up at him, Jiang Hai instantly had goosebumps all over his body. Originally, he just wanted to see the mountain lion and its babies. Why is there such a monster in the forest? Shouldn't this thing exist in South America? What the hell is this? Just when Jiang Hai was puzzled, the snake was very excited. It kept sticking out its tongue, then tied its lower body to the tree, and slowly swam towards Jiang Hai. Seeing this guy move, Jiang Hai instantly raised his gun. When the gun was raised, the snake stopped moving, but it did not leave either. It just looked at Jiang Hai and kept circling there. Looking at its appearance, Jiang Hai could not help but be a little puzzled. What is this guy's background? Why is it here? This guy is clearly from South America, so why is it in my manor? And most importantly, shouldn't this guy be hibernating now? Why is it still living so happily? He glanced at Goldie and Xiaobai beside him and found that the nervous dog was squatting down as if nothing had happened. It was as if they did not see the big snake in front of them. F***ck, what's going on? Did you guys betray me? Looking at the two dogs playing happily beside him, Jiang Hai said gloomily. My luck is too bad. How did I encounter such a probability? This is too unlucky. Hiss, hiss. Seeing that Jiang Hai was still a little vigilant, the giant water serpent slowly swam down from the tree. Its emotionless eyes glanced at Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai saw a trace of emotion in its eyes. It seemed to be saying that there was no harm to it, which made Jiang Hai a little puzzled. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, the water serpent came to the ground and then slowly swam forward. It deliberately walked a very wide path and pressed the grass under its body, as if it was opening a path for Jiang Hai. After walking for a short distance, it deliberately looked at Jiang Hai, as if waiting for him. Didn't they say that after the establishment of the imperial court, animals are not allowed to become spirits? Well, maybe this is the United States, and it's not under the control of the imperial court. Looking at the human-like water serpent, Jiang Hai frowned. It wants me to follow it? Although he was a little nervous, Jiang Hai was still prepared to take a look. Holding the gun, he looked around vigilantly and followed the water serpent into the distance. Chapter 6:17. Where is it taking me? You two guys are too unreliable. Are you going to defect to the enemy at the last minute? While walking carefully, Jiang Hai muttered softly. At the same time, he looked at Goldie and Xiaobai who were still playing at his feet and couldn't help but kick them. After being kicked, Goldie and Xiaobai both looked at Jiang Hai with confusion in their eyes. They didn't know what they did wrong. Phew. Looking at them, Jiang Hai took a deep breath and continued to follow this guy inside. This forest wasn't very big, but it wasn't particularly small either. Jiang Hai had never entered the depths of the forest before. It seemed that today was the furthest he had ever walked. As he kept walking, Jiang Hai found an open space in the forest unknowingly. The vegetation on the ground here seemed to have been deliberately removed, and in the middle of this empty space, there was a large puddle? Well, if it was a lake, then this place was too small. At most, it was a puddle. Jiang Hai didn't know how the puddle was formed. Maybe it was because of the underground water, but at this time, the puddle was a little muddy. And in the distance of the puddle, there was a huge hole. This hole was directly dug out, and there were even some grass and the like inside. When Jiang Hai walked to this open space, a few green lights appeared in the hole. There's an ambush? Looking at the green lights, Jiang Hai's heart thumped. He wanted to see what the hell was going on. If the situation was bad, he would run away quickly. But before he could run, the owner of the green lights had already walked out of the cave. When he saw the owner of the green lights, although Jiang Hai was still shocked, he didn't care anymore. Because the owner of these green lights was none other than the North American mountain lion that Jiang Hai once fed spiritual energy here. At this time, the original lion cubs had grown to the size of a medium-sized dog. When they saw that it was Jiang Hai, they opened their mouths and ran over quickly with their tongues hanging out. The last one to come out was the huge North American mountain lion. It was the guy that Du Feynman thought was a North American lion-like creature. However, this guy had simply absorbed a little bit of Jiang Hai's spiritual energy. In addition, He hunted rabbits and pheasants that contained spiritual energy every day, so he broke through the limits of his body. It's you guys. Looking at the little guys running over, Jiang Hai also squatted down and hugged the little guys running over, then rubbed their heads hard. At this time, the little guys were also jumping around Jiang Hai excitedly. Looking at the appearance of these little guys, Jiang Hai laughed. He didn't expect them to grow so fast. Ayo, ayo. At this time, the North American mountain lion mother walked over and used its huge head to nudge Jiang Hai. Then, it cried out twice to show its welcome to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. He was born to like these fierce animals, especially when these big cats were acting cute. It was really quite strange. Okay, you guys live here. What's the situation with the water gloom? After patting these guys' heads, Jiang Hai looked at the water gloom in the distance. He remembered that this guy brought him here. It seemed that the mountain lion family didn't have any hostility towards the water gloom. This made Jiang Hai a little hesitant. What's going on? Maybe it felt that Jiang Hai was looking over. The water gloom swam to the side of the waterhole at this time and looked at Jiang Hai. Then, it used its tail to whip the water surface of the waterhole twice. Then, a huge figure floated out of the waterhole. When he saw this figure, Jiang Hai couldn't help but gasp because the figure that floated out of the waterhole was none other than a huge crocodile. He had to admit that when a crocodile rose from the water, especially from the very turbid water, it was even more terrifying than the water gloom above his head. Looking at this guy floating up, Jiang Hai couldn't help but gulp. However, after this crocodile floated up, it didn't move when it saw Jiang Hai. Instead, it looked at Jiang Hai with its emotionless eyes and slowly climbed out of the water. It looked at him from afar, just like the water gloom. This scene seems a little familiar. Looking at the crocodile and the water gloom standing there, Jiang Hai's brain suddenly seemed to stop working. A scene suddenly emerged in his mind. The crocodile and the water gloom, two creatures that shouldn't have appeared here, appeared in front of him. This made Jiang Hai a little confused, but the moment the scene appeared in his sealed memory, Jiang Hai remembered them. Ah, in that wild animal warehouse. Oh my God, it's you guys. Looking at the appearance of the snake and the crocodile, Jiang Hai instantly slapped his head. He suddenly understood why Little Yellow, Little White, and Chirps didn't make any movements at all. Instead, it was as if they didn't see them at all. Jiang Hai looked at the snake and crocodile. Also, why did the snake and crocodile coexist peacefully, and why was the mountain lion here? There was only one answer: spiritual energy. Animals were much more sensitive than humans. Although Jiang Hai didn't know how these two guys escaped, after escaping, they clearly found Jiang Hai and felt that the spiritual energy in Jiang Hai's place was different from other places. The reason why they coexisted peacefully was because they felt the familiar feeling in each other's bodies. It was precisely because of this that the three of them were in the forest, and the water gloom led Jiang Hai here after seeing him. It's you guys. Letting go of the small mountain lion beside him, Jiang Hai walked in front of the two big guys and touched their heads hard. However, snakes and crocodiles are cold-blooded animals after all. Since Celanese' last attack was disrupted by Jiang Hai, Celanese has no means to do anything in Winthrop. No matter what they say, no one will listen to them, including Celanese delegation and the gangsters. They can't even buy a bottle of water in Winthrop. Because of this, after that night, Celanese delegation left on the third day. However, the gangsters stayed in town. Every day, they rely on Augustine to buy things from Boston and bring them back to eat and drink. Their lives are really not good. The person in charge of Celanese, Peter ****, who had been chased out of the town, found Faraday Kirk, who had asked them to take over Winthrop and guaranteed their success. Originally, Faraday Kirk wanted to deny it, but he did not expect that the people of Selenes had recorded their conversation. The people of Selenes said to either help them settle the matter, or report him to the authorities. The money he received was enough to keep him in prison for the rest of his life. He wanted to pay compensation, but Selenes people did not want it. Therefore, he could only bitterly ask for his connections. He went to Winthrop and asked his old friend for help. But after listening to his words, his old friend didn't say anything. He just showed Faraday the list of taxes that Jiang Hai will have to pay next year. This made Faraday completely stunned. Next year, Jiang Hai will have to pay more than 600 million yuan in taxes. 400 million was to be paid to the federal government, and about 200 million was to be paid to the state. Although Boston is a metropolitan area, it is definitely at the bottom of the top 10 metropolitan areas in the United States. It was not New York, and it did not care about a few $100 million. They cared a lot. It could be said that Jiang Hai was their god of wealth. Just like Jiang Hai said, no one dared to touch him. Chapter 6:18. Are you sure someone will come tonight? You're so ferocious. Why would the kids come looking for you? While hanging the freshly made pumpkin on the door, Bernice looked at Jiang Hai strangely and asked. As early as a few days ago, Jiang Hai said that there will be kids coming to ask for candy tonight, but Bernice has been in a state of doubt. Because Jiang Hai's reputation in the town is indeed not very good, and the most important thing is that Jiang Hai is really too far from the town. If he drives slowly, it will take him half an hour. If he walks, it will take him more than an hour. Will the kids walk for more than an hour to ask for candy? Even if they are willing, their parents won't be willing. It should be, maybe, probably, almost, someone will come. Hearing what Bernice said, Jiang Hai touched his nose a little awkwardly. To be honest, he was also on a whim, but whether someone will come or not, he is not sure. Only you will believe the words of children. Okay, I'm hanging it up, I hope someone will come, but I'll take a picture first. Hearing Jiang Hai's slightly awkward words, Bernice glanced at him contemptuously, then smiled and hung the last pumpkin. After jumping down, she took a picture of the pumpkin, then smiled happily. Okay, no one will come, just treat it as our own holiday. Touching his nose, Jiang Hai smiled. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Daliana, Marian, and Little Ya all laughed. After everything was arranged, Jiang Hai and the others also returned to the villa. Because they have been really busy recently, Aphrodite and the others haven't come over for a while. Jiang Hai and the others just nestled on the sofa and watched TV casually. It is different from July 15th in China. Although it is also the Ghost Festival, no one will celebrate it on July 15th in China. At most, they will go to the cemetery or the crossroads to burn some paper, that's all. But in the United States, Halloween was still a popular holiday. Not only did people celebrate it, but there were also movies about ghosts on TV. Basically, all the TV stations today were showing movies or dramas about ghosts and monsters. This was also more appropriate for the occasion. Just like in China, there were always New Year's movies being played during the New Year. Jiang Hai didn't know much about American horror movies. He had only seen a few of them before. Alien, Resident Evil, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and so on. Especially A Nightmare on Elm Street, it was all because a long time ago, there was a popular novel writing style in China called Infinite Flow. It was very popular after it came out. Because of the trend, many people wrote about it. Only then did Jiang Hai notice the existence of A Nightmare on Elm Street. However, although Jiang Hai said that he was not afraid of anything, he was somewhat afraid of horror movies, so he nestled on the sofa and casually turned on the TV, hoping to see some movies that were not so scary. No one knows that Jiang Hai actually likes to watch comedies the most. This is also his hobby. But today, the TV station didn't like him, so they didn't show any comedies. Most of them were horror movies. After watching one round, he actually saw a movie about long legs on a pay channel. This made Jiang Hai stunned for a moment, then he turned on the channel. This is a Wuxia movie? It looks like it has been released for a long time. Looking at the movie on the projection TV, Bernice said with some doubts while eating chocolate. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at her with contempt. Don't tell me you haven't seen this movie, it is quite popular. Pointing at the movie in front of him, Jiang Hai said very seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice blinked, as if she really didn't know. I know this. This is a Chinese ghost story, this is Wang Zuxian. Although he is not young, he is really good looking. At this time, Xiaoya, who was sitting next to him, said with a smile. You weren't born in the United States, how can you not know this movie? Jiang Hai made a gesture to Xiaoya, then said to Bernice. This movie was very popular in China. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't know the box office, but the number of times it was replayed on TV was quite a lot. There were a total of 3 movies. To be honest, the first one was not very good, and the second one was too bloody. The best part was the third one. The male lead was changed from Zhang Guorong to Liang Chaowei, and the female lead was still the super invincible long-legged Wang Zuxian, and Li Lianjia's current wife, Li Ji, was also in the movie, showing her very scary cleavage and also attracting attention with her long legs. To be honest, this third movie was very good, and it was always replayed on TV. The combination of Liang Chaowei and Zhang Xueo was also very funny. This movie was more funny than Ghost movie. I didn't want to watch movies when I was young. Bernice rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai, then sat there and watched. Jiang Hai didn't say much after hearing her words, so he also sat there and watched. The movie just started, and Jiang Hai was also very happy to watch it. The most important thing is that this movie is dubbed in Mandarin, which is the version that Jiang Hai is most familiar with. Although there are English subtitles below, Delina and Marian are not so happy to watch it. Just as Xiaofan in the movie turned into a golden Buddha and killed the Black Mountain Demon, the whole movie officially came to an end. But at this moment, Jiang Hai's doorbell suddenly rang, and the 5 people on the sofa were startled. Who is it at this time? Looking at the watch, it was almost 9 o'clock. Shouldn't the children be asleep at this time? Why is someone ringing Jiang Hai's doorbell? Although he was startled, Jiang Hai quickly calmed down, then walked to the door and turned on the video. Don't give me candy or make trouble. When the video was connected, many children dressed strangely shouted loudly. Look, they are finally here. But Jiang Hai couldn't help grinning when he saw this scene. Originally, he thought that these children might really not come tonight, but he didn't expect that these children didn't let him down. Grabbing the pot of candy still in Bernice's arms, Jiang Hai opened the door and walked out. Seriously. That said, Daliana, your father seems to be very fond of children. Looking at Jiang Hai who went out, Bernice elbowed Delina next to her and said to her. It should be, Jiang Hai is also very good to us. Hearing Bernice's words, Delina thought for a while and said. In her eyes, Jiang Hai should be the best person in the world, the person who rescued them from the abyss of hell. And judging from Jiang Hai's usual character, although his reaction to naughty children is ordinary, he seems to really like children. You have to work hard. Jiang Hai likes children so much, it is very likely that the matriarch of this family is the mother of Jiang Hai's first child. If you don't do it now, it will be too late. At this moment, Marian also poked her head over and looked at Bernice and said. Who is going to give birth to his child? Don't talk nonsense, what do children know? Hearing the words of these two, Bernice's face turned red all of a sudden, and then she wanted to take something to eat in a panic, but she couldn't find anything because Jiang Hai had already taken away the snack plate. Looking at her sister's flustered look, little Ya was obviously a little worried. At this time, Jiang Hai had already walked out of his villa. Looking at the children dressed as little skeletons, wizards, ghosts, vampires, witches, and so on outside the door, Jiang Hai walked quickly to the door. "The candy is here, eat it quickly." After opening the door and looking at the children in front of him, Jiang Hai directly handed over the plate and said to them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the children also cheered and began to grab the candy to eat. "Hey, Jiang Hai, I really didn't expect you to be so childish." At this moment, a voice said to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked up and found that in addition to these children, there were also 2 adults here. One of them was Mayor Wallace, and the other was a black man driving a pickup truck. When he saw Jiang Hai looking over, he couldn't help but nod shyly. "Why are you here?" "Hello." Seeing these 2 people, Jiang Hai also walked over and said with some curiosity. His first sentence was naturally to Mayor Wallace, and the second sentence was to the black man. "Hello, Mr. Jiang Hai." Hearing Jiang Hai take the initiative to greet him, the black man was a little caught off guard. He immediately stretched out his hand and shook hands with Jiang Hai. After Jiang Hai shook hands with him, he looked at Mayor Wallace strangely. "Do you think the parents in town will allow children to walk more than an hour to you at night to ask for candy?" Rolling his eyes at Jiang Hai, Mayor Wallace couldn't help but say to him. Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai touched the back of his head embarrassedly. This was also why he thought that no one would come tonight. It is indeed too far. He glanced around his manor. It was dark, and it was indeed not safe. Too far is one thing. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace nodded, then shook his head and continued, "Another thing is that you haven't really integrated into Winthrop yet." Looking at Jiang Hai, Mayor Wallace said with a serious face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was a little puzzled. "You have indeed made a great contribution to Winthrop, but I can be sure that you know less than 20 people in Winthrop. You should know that our town has thousands of people." Looking at Jiang Hai, Mayor Wallace said very seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai calculated for a moment. It seems that, probably, maybe, it's really close. In addition to his own employees, he knows 20 people. Chapter 6:19. It seems that there aren't even 20 of them. Muttering in his heart, Jiang Hai touched his nose and said apologetically. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace also shook his head with a smile. This Jiang Hai is really casual. Although the previous incident has been resolved, you're only treating the symptoms and not the root cause. If you really want the townsfolk to not be afraid of you but to truly support you in the future, then you need to integrate with them. Mayor Wallace said with a serious face as he took out a cigarette from his pocket and put it in his mouth. Integrate with them? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai frowned and touched his chin. To be honest, he had been a bit of a hermit these years. He didn't know how to integrate with these people. He didn't have many friends over the years. Now that he had to step forward and integrate with these townspeople, it was really not an easy thing for Jiang Hai. Now that he heard Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai was a bit hesitant. You have to rely on yourself. Seeing that Jiang Hai really listened to his words and was thinking about it, Mayor Wallace couldn't help but nod with satisfaction. To be honest, if Jiang Hai wasn't a citizen of Wuxia, he would have wanted to pass the position of mayor to Jiang Hai. Because of Jiang Hai's identity, he had more authority in the town than he did. But now, even if he couldn't pass the position of mayor to Jiang Hai, he didn't want to be a scapegoat between Jiang Hai and the townspeople. He needed to make Jiang Hai and the townspeople harmonious. Compared to reforming thousands of townspeople, it was easier to let Jiang Hai take a step forward. I really don't know how to integrate. After thinking for a few minutes, Jiang Hai sighed helplessly. In fact, from the composition of his friends, it could be seen that he didn't have any friends in society. His friends were either childhood friends or classmates. He didn't really have any friends in society. He didn't even have any friends from university, although he went to university for 4 years. So now Jiang Hai, to put it bluntly, he didn't know how to make friends with adults. Of course, he might know more about the other type of friends, but that was only for women, that was all. Mr. Jiang, if you really want to integrate into the town, maybe you can try to attend some gatherings. Looking at Jiang Hai's confused look, the black guy over there hesitated and said to Jiang Hai. This black guy was called Haj Sirsi. He was only 24 years old, but he was quite famous in the town. It was because he opened a machine parts recycling factory. It was similar to the waste collection factories in China, but they only collected machine parts. For example, the tractor in Jiang Hai's manor was used for a year, so some parts were rusty. These rusty parts could easily break if they were used again, which was very dangerous. In the past, Robbins Garcia would take these parts off, then beat the rust off and continue to use them for a few years, but it was dangerous. So after Jiang Hai had this manor, the only thing he could do was to replace all the rusty parts with new ones. Agricultural machines were quite dirty in a year, so the parts were also very worn out. Not long ago, before buying the cattle, all the machines in Jiang Hai's manor had just been replaced with new parts. If all the parts were replaced with new ones, then the old ones would be troublesome. It was not allowed to be thrown away in the United States. Things like computers and TVs were not allowed to be thrown away in the United States. If you didn't use them, you would have to send them to a recycling factory, and then you would have to pay to destroy them. It was the same for these things, so there were many second-hand goods in the United States. There were also people who bought these old parts, such as Haj Sirsi. After he bought these parts and beat the rust off, they could still be used. He could sell them to others, unlike Jiang Hai, who was a rich manor owner. The iron that could not be used could also be melted and sold back to the steel factories for secondary use. He only made a small profit in the middle, but even so, he could still make about $100,000 a year. And because many people needed him, he was quite popular in the town. The reason he was here today was mainly because of his son, who was a little black guy in the group of kids. That day when Jiang Hai was buying candy, he was discovered by these little guys. In fact, these little guys had been waiting to ask Jiang Hai for candy. Every year, these kids would be followed by an adult to prevent them from asking for something they shouldn't. This year, it was Circe's turn. However, as he watched the children finish off the people in the town, the children walked out of the town and wanted to ask Jiang Hai for candy. However, they were stopped by Circe, because in his impression, Jiang Hai was not easy to get along with. However, the children said that they had made an appointment with Jiang Hai and wanted to come over to ask for candy, which made him a little confused. Fortunately, at this time, they met Mayor Wallace, who was returning home from work. After knowing that Jiang Hai's character was actually not bad, they brought the children together. As a result, when they first met, he found that Jiang Hai's character seemed to be really good. A party? Those bars? Hearing Circe's words, Jiang Hai was a little puzzled. He didn't like to go to those bars. You can say that, Americans like to have bars very much, and these bars are the best place to make friends. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Circe also said with a smile. But bars are very noisy, I don't like to go to noisy places. Seeing Circe's praise for bars, Jiang Hai frowned. To be honest, he didn't like to go to nightclubs, bars, or bars. He thought it was too noisy. Oh, Mr. Jiang, the party we hold won't be too noisy. After all, it's held in someone else's house. No one wants to have their house renovated after they leave. We're not those high school kids who will turn the house upside down. Circe shrugged. In fact, in the United States, there are many kinds of bars, all kinds of bars. It's just that Jiang Hai was mistaken by what others said before. Just like Circe said, no one wants to turn the house upside down when they hold a party at home. After all, they still have to live in the house after they leave. If it's not very noisy, and it's just a heart-to-heart talk with the neighbors, I'm quite willing to give it a try. Hearing Circe's words, Jiang Hai's eyes lit up. If it's just to meet some strangers, Jiang Hai doesn't mind. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace also nodded. It's naturally best that Jiang Hai thinks this way. If Mr. Jiang wants to go, there's a charity party tomorrow at Old George's place. Mr. Jiang can go and have some fun. Circe was also a little excited when he heard that Jiang Hai seemed to be interested in going. After all, although he was only 24 years old, he already had a 4-year-old son. He was much more mature than the average 24-year-old college student. He knew that making friends with a rich man like Jiang Hai would only bring him benefits and no harm, especially when this man was in control of the town's economy. Therefore, he immediately recommended Jiang Hai with all his might. Charity party? Hearing Circe's words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. What does this party mean? Is it to donate money? In the United States, a lot of people like to hold charity parties. However, it's not a collection of donations, but an auction. The host and guests will take out some small things that are not very valuable to auction. After the auction, the money can be taken away by themselves, or donated to charity organizations in their own name. Of course, people who buy things directly without auctioning them are the most popular. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little confused, Mayor Wallace also explained to Jiang Hai. In the United States, people really like to donate money. Firstly, it's the most direct way to gain a good reputation. Secondly, it's also because of the United States political policy. Donating money can be used to offset taxes. Of course, the amount is limited. Otherwise, the country won't have the money to pay salaries. The most important thing is that the tax rate for donating money is at least 1 to 1%. Sometimes it's 1 to 1. 2, 1 to 1. 5, or even 1 to 2%. This way, the people who donate money can save a lot of money. Not only can they gain a good reputation, but they can also earn money. There's nothing better than this. Therefore, the rich people in the United States are very enthusiastic about donating money. Of course, the charity auction held by Old George is definitely selling some small things. The final transaction price is about a few $1,000s. They just want to show their sincerity. However, this matter made Jiang Hai very interested. After listening to Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai understood the meaning of this charity auction. He can't do other things, but he's still very interested in throwing money, especially when he can't pay much. Okay, I'll call Old George later. I'll go tomorrow. He clapped his hands. Just like what Mayor Wallace said, if Jiang Hai doesn't integrate into the town, there will be some trouble. Anyway, he has nothing to do now, so it doesn't matter if he goes to take a look. Therefore, he thought for a while and decided to go and take a look. He has nothing to do anyway. Great, Mr. Jiang, I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Hodge Circe. This is my business card. See you tomorrow. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed to participate, Hodge Circe couldn't help but feel excited. Jiang Hai has decided to participate. He didn't need to think to know that when people see Jiang Hai tomorrow, they'll be confused. When asked who asked Jiang Hai to participate, he would say that it was him. Moreover, the most important thing was that Jiang Hai agreed to participate. Jiang Hai would surely remember that it was him who suggested that he participate. Okay, Mr. Circe, see you tomorrow. Looking at the excited Hodge Circe, Jiang Hai also smiled. How could he not know what this man was thinking? But Jiang Hai didn't mind. He was basking in his own glory. Anyway, he had nothing to lose. Chapter 620. You really don't want to go with me? Party, aren't you interested? Looking at the four women who were packing up for him, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. Didn't they say that girls like to join in the fun? Why don't they like to join in the fun? I'm a researcher, that kind of place is not suitable for me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice spoke first. I'd better not go, it feels uncomfortable to be stared at by others. Little Ya also said at this time. If we go, it's inevitable that some boys will come and surround us. It's annoying, after all, we are your daughters. Listening to Bernice and Little Ya's words, Daliana and Marian also looked at each other, then said to Jiang Hai. Okay. Hearing that the four of them didn't want to go, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little depressed. It seems that he is the only one going today. Well, aren't you going with a mission? Go early and come back early. Don't be a womanizer. After you go, have a good talk with them. Patting Jiang Hai's clothes, Bernice said to Jiang Hai as if she was the mistress of the house. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also smiled helplessly. Do I look like a person who will fight? Okay, I'm leaving. Looking at the cash on him again, well, there are 3,000 yuan, which should be enough. Then Jiang Hai left the villa, got in his car, and went to old George's horse farm. Last night, Haj Circe told Jiang Hai about Jiang Hai's integration into this town. Jiang Hai went back and thought about it. In fact, there was nothing to think about. After all, he didn't need to pay anything. He didn't have anything to do recently, so it didn't matter if he went to the local party. So after they left, Jiang Hai went back and called old George and asked about tomorrow's party. When old George learned that Jiang Hai was coming, he was extremely excited. After all, it was Jiang Hai, a person who couldn't be invited. Immediately, Yuelong clapped his hands and invited Jiang Hai to come over. This matter was settled. Early this morning, after Jiang Hai got up, he went to the warehouse in the cowshed as usual to tie grass, then he went back to take a shower and change clothes. After staying at home for half a day at noon and afternoon, he went out at 4:00 in the evening. Taking advantage of the sunset, Jiang Hai drove to old George's horse farm. Out of the gate of the manor, Jiang Hai opened the window on the highway. Although the temperature outside was a bit low, Jiang Hai enjoyed the cold wind. Compared to the air conditioner, he preferred the natural wind. Moreover, it wasn't unbearably cold now. If it was winter, then he wouldn't be so reckless. At this time, it was already November 1st. It was officially winter. Although it didn't snow, the temperature dropped quickly. At noon, when the sun was still up, it might be more than 10 degrees, but now that the sun was setting, the temperature was only about 5 or 6 degrees. Feeling the cold wind blowing around him, Jiang Hai also took a deep breath as he looked at the grassland and corn fields in the distance. Logically speaking, the corn should have been harvested last month, but that wasn't the case. The people who planted the corn would leave some corn in the field. The more mature the corn became, the harder it would become. Humans couldn't eat it anymore. Of course, the corn wasn't for humans to eat. They were prepared to harvest it before the snow, break it into pieces, and feed it to the cows. Jiang Hai didn't plant corn in his manor, but it didn't mean that he didn't know about it. After driving for about 10 minutes, Jiang Hai had already arrived at old George's horse farm. At this time, there were many cars parked outside old George's horse farm. Most of them were pickup trucks, and there were also some motorcycles and cars, but they were obviously not of high grade. As soon as Jiang Hai's car came, it attracted a lot of people's attention. Especially those young people who were making a bonfire in the small courtyard of the horse farm at this time. This is Jiang Hai's car. Why is he here? Jiang Hai's car was still very famous in the town. At that time, many young people recognized that it was Jiang Hai's car. Especially the owner of the horse farm, old George's daughter, Delia, ran out directly. "Hi, Jiang Hai, why are you here?" When she ran out, she just saw Jiang Hai getting out of the car, so she asked excitedly. "Huh, am I not welcome?" Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai smiled and went forward to hug her, then said jokingly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia couldn't help but punch Jiang Hai coquettishly. "This guy is really something. I called your dad last night and said that there was a charity here, so I came to take a look." After just a light hug, Jiang Hai let go of his hand and then said to Delia with a smile. Hearing that Jiang Hai and her father had already talked on the phone, Delia couldn't help but blame her father. He didn't even tell her that Jiang Hai was coming, really. Cough, Delia, this is. Just as Jiang Hai and Delia were talking here, a white young man came over and looked at Jiang Hai and asked with some doubts. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked up at him. Jiang Hai was not familiar with this white young man, and he didn't know him. It was very likely that he was from outside the town, and from the way he looked at him, he should have a special relationship with Delia. "Let me introduce you. This is Jiang Hai. The Soaring Dragon Manor in the west is his. It's a big guy. This is Baveta Jindaro, my boyfriend." Seeing the two meet, Delia introduced with a smile. "Hello." Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai also stretched out his hand and shook the man's hand. However, Jiang Hai could see that when this person heard that he was just a farmer, there was some pride in his eyes. In fact, this was also a kind of human inferiority. Whether it was in the country or abroad, it was inevitable for people in the city to look down on people in the countryside. Even if the people in the countryside were rich, in the eyes of some people in the city, they would feel that they were superior. At this time, Jiang Hai was an out-and-out countryman in the eyes of this man. As for the Soaring Dragon Manor and the big guy that Delia mentioned, he directly ignored it. No one knew where his confidence came from. "Nice to meet you, Delia. I'm going to greet Ben and the others." After shaking hands with Jiang Hai, this Baveta Jindaro, who was still a little nervous, relaxed. After smiling, he said something to Delia, then walked into the open space at the horse farm and gathered with some young people who were obviously dressed differently from the people in town. Baveta works in Boston as a securities trader, commonly known as a trader. Seeing that her boyfriend didn't seem to give Jiang Hai any face, this made Delia a little embarrassed and said to Jiang Hai. "Oh, no wonder." Hearing Delia's explanation, Jiang Hai also chuckled. A trader and a bank employee. It could be said that these were the two most arrogant professions in the world. It was not because of how much money they made, but because they had seen too much money. Because they had seen too much money, they had no concept of money. Even if the money they saw was not theirs, they would have the illusion that they were superior to others. In China, whether it exists or not has become a commentary of this profession. Jiang Hai was very familiar with this in the past. "Come in, my dad and the others are in the room, but I don't think you will like to chat with those old men." Delia saw that Jiang Hai didn't take this matter to heart, so she brought Jiang Hai into her home. But just as they walked in, a group of girls ran over and pulled away the reluctant Delia. Jiang Hai didn't care about this. He just walked in and looked at the layout of this small courtyard. There were a total of 2 venues in the house at this time. The young people were playing on the lawn outside, except for the bonfire in the middle. There were many long tables around the bonfire. There were a lot of food, fruit plates, roasted chicken wings, barbecued meat, beef, salads, and so on. Of course, there was no lack of alcohol. Large barrels of beer and other drinks were also placed on the table. Americans like to drink cola, whether it was Pepsi or Coca-Cola, they liked to drink it very much. On the contrary, other drinks like Sprite didn't sell particularly well in the United States. At this time, there were also many such drinks on the long table. Because he drove here today, Jiang Hai didn't pick up the cold beer in the barrel that looked very good. Instead, he took a bottle of cola and drank it. While drinking, he observed the surroundings. Just like what Cersei had said, this party wasn't too noisy. Of course, it could also be because it hadn't officially started yet. Most of the people gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and chatted softly. But after Jiang Hai walked around, he was a little depressed to find that he didn't seem to know anyone here. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai didn't know many people in the town, and the people he knew were basically some old men. The only young people he was familiar with were Delia and Karmacliff. But the problem was that Karma went to college and she wouldn't come back at this time, so Jiang Hai was a little lonely. After walking around here, Jiang Hai felt that he should go in and see old George and the others. He was familiar with these people. So after drinking the bottle of cola, he walked into the room of the horse ranch. As soon as he walked in, he saw a lot of middle-aged men and women. At this time, they were gathered here and talking. Among them, Jiang Hai was most familiar with old George, Bob George, and Hodge Cersei, who he had just met yesterday. When the two saw Jiang Hai come in, their faces showed surprise. As for the other people in the room, they were also shocked and they saw Jiang Hai come in, because they didn't know that Jiang Hai would come. Chapter 621. Hi, Jiang, you're finally here. Seeing Jiang Hai coming over, old George and Cersei both stood up immediately and took the initiative to greet him. As for the others, they also stood up immediately, even some gray-haired old people. From this, it could be seen that Jiang Hai's reputation in the town had reached a certain level. Take a seat, don't be so polite. Seeing that everyone stood up to greet him, Jiang Hai also smiled, then greeted old George and Cersei, and immediately asked everyone to sit down. Old George's wife had already prepared a chair for Jiang Hai and let him join these people, which made Jiang Hai feel a little flattered. Jiang, let me introduce you to everyone here. Seeing that everyone was seated, old George also smiled and said to Jiang Hai. After all, Jiang Hai was not particularly familiar with the others here except for him. Oh, Cersei is still okay. This is Hodge Cersei, I think you should also know him. This brat sold a lot of your parts to us, this is Cotton Harris, also a rancher, the Straw Hat Flower Ranch to the east of you is his. Hearing old George's words, Jiang Hai also shook hands with Cotton Harris, who was sitting over there. Cotton Harris was a slightly old-fashioned white man in his 50s, and there was no smile on his face, but when he shook hands with Jiang Hai, he deliberately squeezed out a smile. Although it was not much better than crying, it was still a kind of kindness after all. Before Jiang Hai came, Cotton Harris was the biggest rancher here. Of course, the so-called big referred to the people in the West, such as Texas or Montana. It was a super mini ranch. His ranch was a total of 2,700 acres, and Jiang Hai's ranch area was 9,200 acres, much smaller than Jiang Hai's ranch area. However, in this place, his ranch was not small, with a total of 10,000 cows. It was indeed not small. However, the cows he raised were mainly for feed, not for grazing. He did not have that much grass to eat. This is Thackeray Eddy, also a rancher. After introducing Cotton Harris, old George introduced another rancher. This Thackeray Eddy's rancher was much smaller than Cotton Harris's rancher. His ranch was only 200 acres, and he raised very few beef cows, mostly for his own consumption. He mainly raised dairy cows, with a total of 500 dairy cows, and could be considered the town's largest milk supplier. This is Kerry Clark, also a rancher, but his ranch is further away from yours. Then old George introduced another white man, Kerry Clark. Rather than a rancher, he was more of a manor owner, because his ranch was not too big, only 150 acres. He did not raise too many cows, but he raised a lot of sheep, and also planted a lot of vegetables. In the United States, vegetables were more expensive than meat, which was not rare, so it was normal to grow vegetables and sell them. After introducing the 3 white ranchers, Old George introduced 3 more people, 2 black men, and 1 white man. One of the 2 black men was J. Matthew, who also owned a horse ranch. He could be considered as Old George's apprentice, and used to work in Old George's ranch. Later on, he became independent, but he often came back to buy horses. He mainly sold horses outside of Winthrop. After all, this was Old George's territory. There was also Jermaine Launard, who was a used car dealer. He was a very fat black man, and always had a smile on his face. He knew that with Jiang Hai's wealth, it was impossible for him to buy a used car, but since Jiang Hai no longer needed his car, he could sell it to him, so Jiang Hai could be considered a potential customer. The last white man was Base Bono, who was the owner of the small town's dairy factory. He mainly received milk from dairy farmers like Sac Eddy, then processed it and sold it to the small town, or to other places like Boston. Before Jiang Hai bought cows in his manor, he also bought his own milk, and the quality was quite good. Of course, compared to Jiang Hai's milk now, it was a bit worse. After all, cows didn't just eat grass. After the introductions, everyone sat down again, and Old George began to talk about the topic that he didn't finish before. Jiang Hai listened for a while, and to be honest, after listening for 5 minutes, he couldn't bear it anymore, because most of what Old George and the others talked about was related to their politics, but it had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. For example, how many cents the price of ordinary beef had dropped, how much more expensive pasture was to buy, how much more expensive seeds were to buy, how much more expensive those Wall Street vampires should go to hell, and so on. There were also some American politics and so on. For example, it was getting harder and harder to get a ranch loan. In the past, they could apply for $50,000, $100,000, but now, even $10,000 was a problem. They were now thinking about whether they should go to Boston's town hall to protest and put pressure on the government. To be honest, these things had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. First, he didn't buy pasture, and the pasture in his manor wouldn't run out no matter how much he ate. Second, he didn't care about the price of beef, because his beef was so popular, who would dare to lower the price? Third, he didn't need the subsidies and support from the government. His subsidies were just some tax breaks. Apply for a loan? Does Jiang Hai need it? So, although these things were closely related to everyone here, they had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. So after listening for half an hour, Jiang Hai resisted the urge to sleep and left with the excuse that he needed to go to the washroom. Out of the horse ranch house, Jiang Hai couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. After getting another bottle of Coke, he found a corner and sat there with a chair. He looked at the busy people in front of him and drank the Coke in his hand. "Hey, handsome, can I get to know you?" But at this moment, a girl suddenly came over with a bottle of beer and looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also glanced at her. This girl should be a college student, about 20 years old. She was white, with reddish-brown hair, and her figure was quite plump. After all, she was still a college student. Her control of her figure was not so good, but she revealed a youthful aura. At this time, she was looking at Jiang Hai curiously with a pair of big eyes, and Jiang Hai looked at her brown eyes and smiled. Of course, Jiang Hai. Standing up, Jiang Hai stretched out his hand to the girl, and the girl deliberately shook Jiang Hai's hand. "My name is Kelly, Kelly Solon. I know you, the owner of Soaring Dragon Manor." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl smiled and shook hands with Jiang Hai, then took a chair from the side and put it next to Jiang Hai, and said with a smile, "Wow, it seems that I'm quite famous." After taking a sip of Coke, Jiang Hai said with a smile, "Of course, you are the man who controls the lifeline of Winthrop, haha." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl named Kelly also laughed. It seems that Jiang Hai's speech that night was quite successful. "Are you also from Winthrop?" Shaking his head, Jiang Hai actually didn't want to make things too awkward with the townspeople, but sometimes, if you don't give these people a good beating, they won't know the pain themselves. With a smile, Jiang Hai wisely changed the topic and looked at Kelly. He really wasn't familiar with Winthrop people. Of course, our family should have lived in Winthrop for decades. After all, since my grandfather's generation, we have lived here until my death, Kelly said to Jiang Hai with a smile after hearing Jiang Hai's words. Wow, that's really a long time. Looking at your young age, you should still be in university, right? Hearing Kelly's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but exclaim, then asked her. Yeah, I'm in the Department of Marine Engineering at Boston University, but I'm already in my senior year this year. I'm preparing for my graduation thesis, and my credits have already been fixed. Writing a thesis is not difficult, but finding a job is not easy. Kelly shrugged helplessly and said softly. Hearing this, Jiang Hai also wisely didn't continue. He just touched his nose and smiled. Is he going to say something? Is he going to help her find a job? Don't be ridiculous, Jiang Hai doesn't want anything to happen with her. Of course, if it's for free, he would be quite happy. I heard that you didn't come to these gatherings before. Why are you here today? Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't continue with her words, Kelly didn't care. She chuckled and changed the topic. Mayor Wallace said that I should communicate more with the townspeople and integrate into this group as soon as possible. With a shrug, Jiang Hai said helplessly. Although this is a good thing, in the current situation, it doesn't seem to be easy. Looking at Jiang Hai, Kelly thought for a moment and said seriously to Jiang Hai, Americans like to attend parties. This is a good idea, but in addition to attending parties, you should also get along with these people. Get along with them? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. How do I get along with them? He doesn't even know anyone. In this world, the easiest places to form friendships are in the military camp and school. Of course, it's impossible for you to be a soldier or a student, but the battlefield in peacetime is in the arena. Do you know any sports? Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled look, Kelly also smiled and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing Kelly's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but let out an "oh." I know how to play basketball. Thinking about it, he was quite good at basketball in the past. He could abuse professional players. Basketball? That might work, but I'm not too sure. As far as I know, the best sports to make friends are baseball and football. He rubbed his hair lightly. It seems that basketball in the United States really belongs to stepmothers. It's not popular. But as for baseball and football, Jiang Hai doesn't know how to play. This is also a problem. Chapter 622. In fact, if you want to integrate into the town, the most important thing is to have no gap with them. Don't let them always think that you are the one who controls the town's economy. You are different from them. When they no longer care about your skin color and your property, you are officially integrated with the town's residents. Ignoring Jiang Hai's puzzled gaze, Kelly, Soren smiled and spoke. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. He knew that the girl was right, but now that Jiang Hai wants to integrate here, he needs to consider a lot of things. After all, he has a net worth of billions. Although most of it is not known, he still needs to think about it. But I don't know how to play football or baseball. My understanding of these two sports is limited to the cartoons I've seen before. Shrugging, Jiang Hai said helplessly. Indeed, he didn't know much about these two sports. In fact, football and baseball are very easy. There are football and baseball teams in our town. I am very familiar with their people. If you are interested in joining, I can recommend you to try. Looking at Jiang Hai, Kelly said with a smile. But listening to her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. It's better not to integrate sports into the story of the city. Even if it's football and baseball, Jiang Hai doesn't want anyone to say that he doesn't do his job. Well, it's a bit of a sloppy job. Hey, Kelly, I was looking for you. You are here. Just as Jiang Hai and Kelly were chatting happily, a young man in his early 20s also came over. After looking at Jiang Hai with some vigilance, he said to Kelly, Soren. Hey, Jack, what can I do for you? But obviously, Kelly Sauron was not like a little girl who would take the initiative to leave. It was not easy for her to make friends with Jiang Hai. She would not leave so easily. Hearing Kelly Sauron's words, the young man named Jack was speechless. It could be seen that this young man named Jack was interested in Kelly, but Kelly wasn't interested in him now. Well, I was going to ask you if you wanted a drink, but it seems like there's no need for that now. Jack shrugged his shoulders and said helplessly. He took one last look at Jiang Hai and walked back to the campfire. The man named Baveta Jindirat spoke, and his eyes drifted to Jiang Hai's side from time to time. Baveta is actually a good guy. He's witty, humorous, and earns a lot of money. His family background is also not bad. No wonder Delia was able to establish a relationship with him so quickly and even brought him home. Looking at Jack and Baveta in the distance, Kelly said this sentence unconsciously, but Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh when he heard it. In fact, he understood the meaning of the girl's words. If he didn't appear today, Kelly would probably be Jack's female companion. But to be honest, Jiang Hai was not interested in these girls. It didn't matter if it was just for fun, but if he got involved, it was not necessary because they were unlikely to tolerate Jiang Hai's nonsense. Jiang Hai's business was not small now. Naturally, he also needed a woman who could take care of the overall situation. Well, the party is about to start. Let's go. By the way, do you have an auction item? Looking at Kelly Soren in front of him, Jiang Hai looked at her curiously and asked. Kelly also chuckled when she heard Jiang Hai's words. I auctioned some flower seeds. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't care about what she said, Jiang Hai didn't know what Kelly was thinking, but her face didn't change. She just continued to speak with a smile. Don't donate the money later. Okay, let's go. Glancing at Kelly, Jiang Hai walked over with a smile. As they walked over, the party officially began. The parent-level existences in the room also came out and had a good meal around the campfire. Then, it was time for the auction. Today's auctioneer was Delia, and the first item to be auctioned was her item. This item was a very delicate silver snuff bottle. In fact, it was given to her by a tourist from Wuxia. After all, Delia was quite good-looking. In the face of such a foreign woman, not everyone was as calm as still water, so some tourists would come to flirt with her. Of course, they didn't do anything excessive, but it didn't matter if they received some gifts in exchange for some gifts. After all, it was a pure silver snuff bottle, so the bidding price wasn't low at the beginning. $20 or $30 were constantly being bid. 50. Jiang Hai looked at it. He also had some interest in this little thing. After all, it was also something from his country, and Jiang Hai could also benefit from it. But just as he finished bidding $50, Delia's boyfriend, Baveta Jindaro, bid $100. As soon as he saw him bid, Jiang Hai directly gave it to him. But when he learned that Jiang Hai had gotten the snuff bottle, this guy clearly looked at him with disdain, which made Jiang Hai a little unhappy. Does this guy think I'm easy to bully? Baveta is a good guy, but he's still too young. He just graduated from college not long ago. His family got someone to help him get into the security center to be a trader. It's okay to have a friend, but he's still a long way off. Perhaps sensing Jiang Hai's dissatisfaction, old George, who was sitting next to him, couldn't help but laugh. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also laughed. He understood what old George meant. He wanted Jiang Hai not to be angry with this guy. He wouldn't be angry with Jiang Hai, but it was inevitable that he would be unhappy. But he wouldn't directly fight back. Jiang Hai wasn't interested in the next few items. There was a blanket, a handmade saddle, an oil painting, and so on. Jiang Hai wasn't very interested in these things, so he just sat there and looked. We all know that Kelly's family is the largest flower plantation in the town. All the flowers in the town are planted by her family. These 100 seeds contain all kinds of flowers, and I can guarantee that every single one of them can be planted. To be honest, even I want some of them. Alright, the auction with no reserve price starts now. Just as Jiang Hai was sitting there and looking, the flower seeds that Kelly had mentioned to him were finally brought up. Although it was only a small packet, it could be seen that after Delia mentioned it, many women showed a look of yearning. There were very few women who didn't like flowers and sparkling things. However, compared to sparkling things, flowers were easier to come into contact with. Many women looked at their male companions on the spot. Their intentions were self-evident. $50. However, before anyone spoke, the first one to speak was Jack. It could be seen that he was deeply in love with Kelly, so it was natural for him to be the first one to call her. After calling her name, he looked at Kelly excitedly. As for the others, after hearing that the starting price was $50, most of them fell silent. 100 seeds were sold for $50, which meant that each seed was sold for 50 cents. That was a bit unacceptable for everyone. After all, it was already a bit of a loss to sell a flower for 50 cents, let alone a seed that might not even survive. $100. But unfortunately, in order to repay Kelly for her words, Jiang Hai didn't care about money, even though it was unlikely that anything would happen between Jiang Hai and her. He directly took out $100. $200. Jack, who originally thought that he had it in the bag, couldn't help but be stunned when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Then, he glared at Jiang Hai and called out a number. $500. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't care at all. With his net worth, a few $100? If it fell into the sea while he was out at sea, he might not even go into the sea to get it. He indeed didn't care about this little bit of money, but that didn't mean that others didn't care. Many people sucked in a cold breath when they heard Jiang Hai raise the price to $500. One had to know that the purchase rate of dollars in the United States was still very high. $500 could last a month. Although it was a bit tight, it was at least enough for food, drinks, rent, utilities, internet, and so on. When Jiang Hai called out $500, Jack's expression turned ugly. Many people looked at Kelly with the same expression in their eyes, "You're in luck." In their eyes, Jiang Hai spent a lot of money to buy Kelly's things because Jiang Hai wanted to pursue her. But only Kelly knew that Jiang Hai was only paying for it. Seeing Kelly's look, Jack pulled Baveda over and whispered to him. After that, Jack called out a number. $650. I really like these seeds. Please give me some face and let me have them. $650 was already the sum of all the cash he and Baveda had on them. But they knew that Jiang Hai was rich. If Jiang Hai didn't let them have the money now, they wouldn't have any more money to buy. Unfortunately, when he said that, the Winthrop townsfolk were amused. Now, everyone in Winthrop knew that Jiang Hai was famous for being amenable to persuasion but not coercion. If you asked him in private, he might stop, but if you threatened him so openly, it would be strange if he didn't. Sure enough, as soon as Jack finished speaking, Jiang Hai raised his hand again. He glanced at the group and couldn't help but chuckle. $1,000. Wow! As soon as Jiang Hai finished speaking, everyone present exclaimed. $1,000. A small auction like this might not even sell for $1,000 in the end. But Jiang Hai casually called out this price just to buy 100 flower seeds. It had to be said that ordinary people really didn't understand the world of the rich. As for Jack, when he heard Jiang Hai's words, he was already angry. He wanted to rush over but was stopped by Baveta. Chapter 623. Calm down, Jack, we're in Winthrop. Looking at Jiang Hai and the others in the distance, Baveta Jindirat whispered in Jack's ear. Hearing Baveta's words, Jack had to calm down. Jiang Hai was throwing money at the girl he liked in front of him. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't be able to bear it, okay? $1,500. Looking at Jack's eyes that were about to burst into flames, Jiang Hai smiled disdainfully. He actually raised the price by $500 when he offered $1,000. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, everyone looked at Jack with a hint of ridicule on their faces. Although they weren't familiar with Jiang Hai, they knew that Jiang Hai really didn't lack money. You bastard! Jack couldn't help but roar when he heard Jiang Hai raise the price by $500 like a slap in the face. $2,000. Hearing Jack's roar, Jiang Hai stood up again and said smugly. He didn't know if it was the feeling of being a bad guy hidden in his genes that made him burn up again. He now really liked the feeling of slapping others in the face in front of them. He was a bad guy, come and hate him. Who the F***ck, F***ck, idiot. Seeing Jiang Hai raised the price to 2,000, the man's face became even uglier. After cursing a few times, he turned and left. He knew that he wouldn't have a good ending if he had a conflict with Jiang Hai here. Instead of humiliating himself here, it was better to just leave. Therefore, he didn't care about Baveta's pull and directly left George's horse farm. He rode his motorcycle outside and left. Watching him leave, Jiang Hai helplessly shrugged. Okay, the final price is $2,000. These seeds belong to our Winthrop's richest man, Mr. Jiang Hai. Seeing that her only competitor had left, although she knew that he couldn't afford the price, Delia still waited for him to leave before announcing the birth of today's bidding king. After Delia gave the flower seed to Jiang Hai nodded and said, "Let's go." Jiang Hai also directly took out $2,000 in cash and handed it to Kelly Sauron next to him. When Kelly took the money, she deliberately scratched Jiang Hai's palm. Her meaning was obvious, but Jiang Hai didn't want anything to happen with her. So, he just smiled, gave her the money, and returned to his seat. Looking at Jiang Hai's performance, Kelly curled her lips a little helplessly. If it was an ordinary American, he would have left with her or taken her away. Jiang Hai didn't bring a female companion, but he was still so careful. Back in his seat, Jiang Hai leaned back and looked at the items that continued to be auctioned. Hey, Jiang Hai, your move is really good. Not only did you defeat your rival, but it seems that you also made Kelly completely fall in love with you. Serge walked over and sat next to Jiang Hai and whispered to him. Even though Cersei was a father, he was still quite young. He was only at the level of a university student. It's just that he didn't go to college. Instead, he used the money and time from college to open a parts factory. Are you familiar with this, Kelly? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai asked him strangely. Of course, Kelly is a famous flower in our town. Her family also grows flowers. The largest flower shop in our town is opened by her family. Her family is also your tenant. After all, it's on the business street. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Serge also said to Jiang Hai. Black people's personalities are two extremes. If he doesn't know you well, he doesn't like to talk to you, especially when he doesn't like you. But if he knows you well, then he is a chatterbox, and the speed of talking is not much slower than the speed of rapping. As soon as he heard Jiang Hai ask about Kelly, he started to talk non-stop. Jiang Hai also had a general understanding. Kelly was quite famous in the town. She was quite beautiful, and her studies were good since she was a child. She was not a troublemaker. In high school, she didn't mess around with men and women. In college, she had a boyfriend, but the guy was 1 year older than her. They broke up after graduation. Now, she was still in a relationship. And this Jack is Baveta's friend. Kelly is Delia's friend. They met through this pair. After that, Jack started to pursue Kelly. However, judging from the current situation, the effect wasn't very good. By the way, I heard that you often play football games? Listening to Serge's machine gun-like words, Jiang Hai immediately shouted stop and began to change the topic. Of course, I am a member of our Winthrop football team. Although we Winthrop people don't have much money, our team is definitely in the top 3 in this area. Serge said with a smile when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Americans really like to play baseball and football. There are 4 major leagues in North America: ice hockey, baseball, basketball, and football. However, ice hockey was more or less a limited sport. There was no ice in the South. If they wanted ice, they had to build their own ice rink in the stadium. If they played in this way, they would definitely have to spend money. After all, not everyone was willing to spend this money. Therefore, the expansion of ice hockey among the people is not very good. Basketball was originally a pure black sport. Although white people participate in it, they are still much less well known. And in the United States, after all, white people still have the final say. Basketball's position in the United States is more awkward. In the beginning, it was only better than ice hockey. Later, it might not even be able to maintain its position in the United States. Fortunately, David Stern decided to globalize and make the NBA of the world. Speaking of football, there were 5 major leagues in Europe, which divided the viewing audience. Some like to watch the English Premier League, some like to watch Serie A, some like to watch La Liga, and so on. But when it came to basketball, there was only one international league in the world, the NBA. All the top players had to join this league, which was the highest level of competition. Because of this, although basketball is very famous in the United States now, there are not many people who really like it. Baseball is a sport for white people in the United States. There is no physical collision. Before the rise of football, baseball has always been the biggest league in the United States. When it began to decline. Perhaps it was after the United States began to strictly investigate racial discrimination. Speaking of football, it is worthy of being the biggest sport in North America. This sport is very barbaric and makes people excited. Most importantly, black people and white people can have their own exclusive positions on the field. For example, black people, defensive linemen, running backs, and receivers were all positions that they could play. On the other hand, white people had a much higher chance of producing a top-notch quarterback. In addition, this sport was really a clash of muscles, so there were many people watching it. The community sports culture in the United States is very developed. Almost every community, every small town has its own many kinds of teams, such as basketball, baseball, football, and so on. Then, the nearby cities or states will hold some competitions from time to time every year. There are also prizes. Not only can the teams show their faces, but they can also get some monetary rewards. So in the United States, sports for all people is not just a saying. When it comes to football, Serge is obviously more interested than Kelly. This is because he knows that Kelly will not like him, but he likes football very much. But to be honest, Jiang Hai does not know much about football. The only thing he has seen about football is a cartoon, Lightspeed Masked Man 21. This is a normal cartoon from Japan. It is very exciting to watch, but because of the audience, this cartoon that Jiang Hai thought was good did not become popular in China. The main character, Kobayakawa Ryona, can reach a speed of 4.2 seconds for 40 meters, 0.91 meters per yard. Later, it evolved to 4.1 seconds, which is faster than the speed of light on the field. But for Jiang Hai, is 4.1 seconds for 40 meters fast? If he runs with all his strength, he should be able to run 100 meters in less than 5 seconds. After all, the human body limit of 4 times is not a joke. However, Jiang Hai is just listening. The last time he played basketball, he almost collapsed. This time, it is better for him to be careful. After listening to Surge for a long time, Jiang Hai also listened for a long time, but he did not intend to try it. But he does not want to try it, but Surge wants him to see it. He can see that Jiang Hai does not know much about football, but in his opinion, as a man, how can he not like football? This should not be the case. It just so happens that we have a friendly game the day after tomorrow against Chelsea, a city near Boston, not a football team, in Boston's XX Stadium. You can come and see it then. Seeing that Jiang Hai seems to be moved by his words, Surge could not help but say excitedly. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also nodded. It does not matter if I go and see it. He has nothing to do anyway. After the time was agreed, the auction here was also over. In the end, a total of $4,270 were sold tonight. Of course, 2,000 of them were Jiang Hai's. The owner of this money can choose to donate the money or choose to take it away. Basically, anything worth $100 or $80 was donated, and anything worth a few $100s was taken away, especially Kelly's money. If she donated it, naturally, everyone would be very happy, but if she took it away, no one would say anything. After all, it was $2,000. In the end, she hugged Jiang Hai and wanted Jiang Hai to send her back. After failing, Kelly Solon pouted and left. Jiang Hai also drove back to his manor. Today was a good start. After returning, Jiang Hai told Bernice and the others that he was going to watch the football game the day after tomorrow, but they despised him because in their view, the football game was actually a very barbaric game. At least, they did not like it. Chapter 624. Run this way and go around to catch the ball. When the catcher catches the ball, pay attention to the flanks and protect both sides. Looking at the people warming up on the field, Jiang Hai slowly walked to the stands next to him with a hint of expectation on his face. Jiang Hai really had nothing to do recently, so after tying the grass this morning, he went home to change his clothes, took a shower, and drove to Boston Stadium because he remembered Cersei said that they had a game against Chelsea today. Sure enough, as soon as he entered, he saw the people warming up. At this time, the catchers were warming up. Rugby balls were bounced out, and a black Winthrop catcher was constantly jumping in the air and collecting the football in the air into his arms. He had to admit that Winthrop's rugby team had a lot of people, and many of them were people that Jiang Hai knew. Of course, he was only familiar with them. In addition to Cersei, he also recognized the person who sold him the sea map at the Poseidon Festival. He was the defensive lineman, and Cersei was the offensive lineman. In addition, there were some people that he was familiar with, but he did not know what they were for. Winthrop was not small, but there were not many people. It was a town with a total of only a little more than 1,000 people. Although Jiang Hai wasn't the same as when he first came here, when he saw a white person as a white person and a black person as a black person, and if he didn't look carefully, he couldn't tell who was who. But now, he still looked a little blurry. After glancing at Cersei and the others, Jiang Hai looked to the side and saw a group of girls dancing on the sidelines. What surprised Jiang Hai was that among these girls, Jiang Hai actually knew 2 of them. One was Delia, and the other was Kelly Solon. At this time, these 2 girls were leading a dozen girls of different ages to dance there. The weather was indeed not warm, and it was even a little cold. Wisps of white steam were coming out of the heads of these girls. It was obvious that they had been practicing for a long time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, Winthrop will win, Winthrop will win, Winthrop is the best. Listening to the girls' slogans, Jiang Hai slowly walked over. He had to admit that the Winthrop girls were quite good-looking, probably because they lived by the sea. The Winthrop girls had good figures, tight and elastic. Especially today, they were still wearing summer cheerleading uniforms. The top was a shirt that exposed the waist, and the bottom was a skirt. Although they were wearing safety pants and knee-length white stockings, it still looked very cold. It was only about a few degrees outside. Jiang Hai. Ladies, that's enough. Let's conserve our energy. We still have to cheer for our warriors later. Seeing Jiang Hai walk over, Kelly and Delia clapped their hands, signaling the girls who were still dancing to take a break. Hearing their words, the girls who were still dancing stopped. Then, without caring about the sweat on their bodies, they directly put on the jackets next to them, because they knew that they were not wearing much at this time. If they waited for a while before putting on their jackets, they would catch a cold. They did not want to be cheerleaders for a small town's team and end up affecting their normal lives. That would not be worth it, especially in the United States, where a cold was not a minor illness. That was because the United States did not sell the cold medicine from China. Cold medicine actually had side effects. While killing germs, it would also kill white blood cells. In the past, the cold medicine from China contained an ingredient called cough. Alright, I can't say it, but this ingredient, after being refined, could be made into a unique product. Therefore, generally speaking, the cold medicine from China was not allowed to enter the market. And foreign countries did not produce their own cold medicine, so if you caught a cold, the hospital would only give you a bunch of vitamins and let you go home to take them. Then, force yourself to endure and use your own immune system to cure the cold. If it was really too serious, and you had a high fever that made you unconscious, then you would be directly taken to the hospital to be hospitalized for an drip. Therefore, in the United States, a cold was really not a comfortable illness, so most people paid attention to this point. Jiang, why are you here? After putting on their jackets again, Delia and Kelly ran over with a smile. I heard from Cersei that there is a game today. I have nothing to do, so I came to take a look. Looking at the two girls in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. He naturally knew that these two girls did not have good intentions towards him. They were quite interested in him, no, it should be said that they were interested in his money. But they were all from the same town, so Jiang Hai did not want to have a falling out with the residents of the town. If that happened, it would be very awkward. He wanted to have some relations with Aphrodite and the others, even though Jiang Hai had been arguing that rabbits did not eat the grass near their burrows. But if Jiang Hai was a little tougher, then it would at most be a little awkward when Aphrodite and his women met in the future. That was all. But if old George or Kelly Solan's father blocked the door with a gun, then it would be awkward, so even if he knew that as long as he waved his hand, the two girls would follow him, he still did not dare to do so. Yeah, we'll definitely teach those Chelsea people a lesson today. Come on, come and sit here. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, which were obviously distant, Delia could not help but curl her lips, but Kelly still said with a smile. Then the two girls took Jiang Hai to the front of the stands at the back. At this time, there were already a lot of people sitting in the stands. Some of these people were the players' families, some were the townspeople who had nothing to do, and some were passers-by. In the United States, football was indeed a national sport. Many people liked it. When they saw a game, it was inevitable for them to come in and take a look. Among these people, Jiang Hai found a group of familiar kids. They were the children who had asked him for candy on Halloween. But unfortunately, these children were going crazy there at this time, and no one would pay attention to Jiang Hai. In the world of children, although money was important, it was not the most important thing. They knew that Jiang Hai was rich, but they did not care about the money, so they did not care about what was going on with Jiang Hai. Jiang, do you know about football? Sitting in the first row of the stands, Delia and Kelly did not care. They sat on the left and right of Jiang Hai. After all, they had just finished exercising. The two girls' bodies were exuding heat. When a woman smelled a man's sweat, she would feel that this person was very manly, and when a man smelled a woman's sweat, he would feel strange. Just as Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed, Delia asked Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai nodded. I know a little about it. The field is divided into the offensive team and the defensive team, but that is professional. It is also divided into linebackers, receivers, quarterbacks, running backs, and so on. If you carry the ball to the area in front of the big fork, you will get 5 points and you can add a penalty kick. If you also touch the field, you will get 2 more points. If you kick the ball into the goal, you will get 1 point. If you choose to kick the ball under normal circumstances, you will get 3 points and there is no chance to add offense. Hearing Delia's question, Jiang Hai touched his nose and said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia could not help but be a little surprised. I thought you didn't know anything. On the other side, Kelly smiled and put her hand on Jiang Hai's arm and said with a smile. Seeing Kelly's action, Delia also took the initiative to move closer to Jiang Hai. Feeling the two girls getting closer and closer, Jiang Hai did not know what to do for a moment. Although Jiang Hai usually meant what he said, when it came to the matters between men and women, Jiang Hai was still very passive. It was clear from the number of times he was disobeyed. Our team is a team that combines running and passing. Cersei's speed and skills are very good. The catchers, Tom and Carrie, are very good. Their running positions are quite sharp. In Boston, the only teams that can compete with us are Boston, Chelsea, and Cambridge. But recently, Cambridge's main force moved to California, and they can't do it anymore. Currently, they are in Massachusetts. It's us, Chelsea, and Boston, the three powerhouses. Delia and Kelly did not care whether Jiang Hai was embarrassed or not. They wanted to sit directly in Jiang Hai's arms at this time. There was nothing wrong with sticking to Jiang Hai. While sticking to Jiang Hai, they also talked to Jiang Hai about the strength of Winthrop and the enemies of Winthrop. At this time, on the other side of the field, a group of people in blue and white came out of the tunnel. If nothing unexpected happened, those people should be the opponent of the Winthrop team today, Chelsea. Chelsea's security guards, go back to your hometown. As soon as they saw Chelsea come out, the stands on the other side of the field were naturally filled with thunderous cheers. But on the Winthrop side, the boos were deafening. Even Delia stood up and shouted at the team over there. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. This Chelsea team is famous for playing dirty on our side. Their boss and their quarterback are called Kristen Adis. He has a big casino in Chelsea. These players are the security guards he hired. It's not an exaggeration to say that they are notorious. Kelly also said to Jiang Hai when she saw the confusion in Jiang Hai's eyes. Well, they really don't look like good-for-nothings. He glanced at the people over there. Although they were far away, Jiang Hai's eyes were good. With a glance at the people over there, he knew that these people were not good-for-nothings. Although there was no murderous aura on them, which meant that they had no lives on their hands, their fierce aura was quite strong. If an average person encountered these guys, they would probably be shocked by their fierce aura. Of course, this was also a characteristic of being a security guard. No, it was not right to call them security guards because they should be thugs to be exact. Chapter 625. We'll be counting on you later. Winthrop's captain patted Cersei's shoulder as he looked at the Chelsea team. Cersei was in the spare parts business all year round, so he could not afford to hire anyone. Therefore, he did all the loading and unloading of the car himself. Coupled with his black physique, he ran extremely fast and his body was abnormally strong. He could be said to be one of the best running backs in the Massachusetts Town League. There were not many non-professional players in Massachusetts who were better than him. The only one who could compete with him was the Boston team's running back. Cersei laughed when he heard the captain's words. After the two teams appeared on the stage, the game was about to start. Kelly and Delia, although they still wanted to stay by Jiang Hai's side, now that the game had started, they had no choice but to leave. After all, they were still cheerleaders. There will be a barbecue after the game. Let's go together. Kelly and Delia said to Jiang Hai before they left. For a game like theirs, regardless of whether they won or lost, there would be a party. If they lost, they would relax. If they won, they would naturally celebrate. Today's party was prepared early in the morning. It was a barbecue party in Cersei's factory. Holding a barbecue party with the smell of engine oil was really, quite creative. Okay. Jiang Hai did not have anything to do today, so he smiled and said, okay. He would not be able to blend into the town and play with the old people. Rather than that, he would rather mix with the young people. Based on the current situation, the young people of Winthrop were quite kind to him. Delia and Kelly laughed and they heard Jiang Hai agree. Then, they looked at each other. In a position where Jiang Hai could not see, there were sparks in their eyes from time to time. Regardless of what the two women thought, the match officially began after the two teams finished their warm-up. After the coin toss, the first team to attack was Chelsea. On the other side, Winthrop's team kicked the ball directly to the midfield with a big kick. The Chelsea team's receiver instantly caught the football and ran over. However, before he could run 20 yards, he was pushed to the ground by the Winthrop team's linebacker who rushed over. Bang! Both of their bodies fell on the lawn. Jiang Hai felt the pain in his body when he heard it. Although these people were wearing helmets and protective gear, after all, this was not a professional competition, so the protective gear was not too tight, and the defense was very ordinary. It was somewhat like the protective gear worn by children when they first learned to roller skate, but with the addition of a battle suit like the one worn by the Scions in Dragon Ball when Vegeta and others first came to Earth. It was used to protect the torso. But even so, Jiang Hai looked at the two people who fell and felt pain for them. However, it was nothing to them. Although they pushed the man down, the receiver firmly controlled the ball in his arms. They were going to attack from here, and the ball was also theirs. At the referee's signal, the two teams began to line up. A group of the strongest Americans lined up at the front. These people were the team's wall. They were the linebackers. Behind the linebackers was the quarterback. On the left and right stood the receivers and running forwards. With the referee's whistle, the Chelsea quarterback also began to shout, "Heart, heart, heart, heart." The Chelsea players did not move at first, but when Hart shouted for the third time, the linebacker in the middle instantly threw the football in front of him over his crotch and into the hands of the quarterback. The game began at that moment. On the other side, Winthrop's players also pounced on the opponent at the first moment. The defensive lineman blocked the defensive lineman, and the two interceptors instantly bypassed the human wall and headed towards the opponent's 4-point line. However, the opponent's quarterback had already passed the ball to their running backs. Their forward used one hand to protect the ball while his other hand instantly pressed down on the helmet of a tackler who was rushing over. The tackler fell to the ground. Then, he jumped over the tackler and sprinted in the direction of the goal. Hiss, oh! Looking at the man who fell there and was about to overturn the soil, Jiang Hai also grinned. But although it felt a little cruel, Jiang Hai's eyes could not leave the field in front of him. He now understood why no country other than the United States and Australia had introduced this sport. It was really too cruel. Jiang Hai had only heard of rugby before, but he had not played it in China. He had not even watched a game. He only heard that there was a type of rugby in China that was learned from Europe. It was called the waist flag rugby. Pulling the flag at the waist was considered to have stopped the opponent. It was not as cruel as it was now. He had to admit that there was actually a tyrannical factor in the human body, especially when watching a game like this. Although Chelsea's running forward killed an interceptor, he did not run too far. After running for 5 or 6 yards, he was stopped by a big white man on Winthrop's side with a grappling move. Jiang Hai had some impression of this white man. He did not know his name, but he knew that he was a fisherman. He had a fishing boat at home. Jiang Hai had seen him when he chose the fishing boat to take tourists to play. This guy was 195 meters tall. He was fast and strong. After all, he was a fisherman. His fishing boat did not have an automatic net reel. It had to be turned by hand. Even if there were pulleys, that thing was not an ordinary kind of hard. Therefore, he trained this guy to have a strong physique. In an instant, he approached the running back and directly grabbed him. Just like a shoulder bump in wrestling, he directly knocked the guy back more than a meter. The football also fell to the ground powerlessly. The rugby ball touched the ground and the attack failed. If it did not touch the ground, both sides could continue to attack if it was snatched. But if it touched the ground, the attack failed. But Chelsea did not care because they had 4 opportunities to attack, knock him down. When the two sides rearranged the formation, Jiang Hai was also infected by the atmosphere at the scene. He had to admit that rugby was indeed a sport that could make people's hormones soar rapidly. In the beginning, when he watched the slam dunk master, he did not care too much. But after Kuriko's basketball came out, it was simply a fantasy instead of a sports competition. After all, it could cover the entire field with a 100% three-point field goal percentage, absolute defense within the three-point line, the ability to imitate the opponent's movements in an instant, the ability to use all postures to put the ball into the basket, the ability to dribble the ball forward and say, "You will make way for me." The opposing player would fall down by himself. If these things appeared in reality, well, there was nothing to see in the NBA. Although the speed of light masked man was not as bad as Kuriko's basketball, it was also a little exaggerated. But with just a little understanding of the cartoon, Jiang Hai had a smattering of knowledge about the game on the field. He had to admit that it was really interesting. It even gave him the urge to go back and watch the NFL. However, he was only going to take a look. He wasn't too willing to participate in it because the gap between them was too big. Soon, the first half of the game ended amidst the cheers of Jiang Hai and the others. Winthrop's side led the opponent 12-9 with Cecil's 2 touchdowns. The opponent scored a touchdown, hit an extra kick, and scored 3 points with another kick. "Hey, Jiang, you're here. Watch how we slaughter these Chelsea guys." When she came back to rest, Serge saw Jiang Hai sitting in the first row at a glance, so she spoke with a smile. "I'm waiting for you to win. If you win, I'll pay for the drinks later." Looking at Serge, Jiang Hai also gave a thumbs up and said with a serious face. When she heard that Jiang Hai was paying for the drinks, Serge knew that he was going to celebrate with them. She laughed loudly. When the others learned that Jiang Hai was paying for the drinks and that he was going to celebrate with them, they also shouted that it was a good thing. Originally, when they went to Serge's place, the drinks they drank were just beer or some low-grade wine. After all, they were not rich people. But since Jiang Hai said that he was paying for the drinks, it proved that the drinks later would definitely be much better than they imagined. This time, they were even more excited. What's the commotion over there? Looking at the Winthrop people in the distance, the Chelsea quarterback on the other side, who was also the owner of the team, could not help but ask with some doubts. I heard that the richest man in Winthrop is here and said that he wants to treat them to a drink. Hearing the boss's words, a younger brother next to him could not help but come over and speak to him. Hearing his words, Kristen Adis could not help but raise his eyebrows. The richest man? That Wuxia Jiang. Looking into the distance, he vaguely saw the yellow-skinned guy in the crowd. Jiang Hai's reputation was not only in Winthrop, but also in Boston. After all, this was an out-and-out billionaire. Being on good terms with such a person was beneficial to Kristen. After all, he was the owner of a casino. If he relied on those poor people to play, he wouldn't be able to make much money. At this time, he looked at Jiang Hai as if he was looking at a fat sheep. Of course, was Jiang Hai a fat sheep? The 10-minute break quickly passed. Winthrop and Chelsea came to the field again and the game continued. Chapter 626. Victory. With the last ball, Winthrop's kicker kicked the ball into the opponent's half of the field and ran behind him. After finishing the last minute, Winthrop's side also shouted loudly. Jiang Hai could not help but jump up and wave his fist vigorously. Compared to Winthrop's side, Chelsea's stands on the other side were far less lively. Great play! Jiang Hai shouted loudly to the crowd on the field with his hands by his mouth. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cersei and the others did not forget to wave at Jiang Hai while celebrating. The duration of a football game was actually very short. Of course, it was longer than a football game. Although it looked like it was only 80 minutes, the first half was 40 minutes, and the second half was 40 minutes. But with the addition of the 10 minutes for changing players and timeouts, it was indeed longer than a football game. Of course, this referred to the situation where there was no overtime and injury stoppage time. The game that seemed short but actually lasted for a long time was basketball. For example, in the NBA, it looked like the duration of a game was only 48 minutes, but it was divided into 4 sections. The two teams could call for a lot of stoppages. In addition to the official timeouts, it was not uncommon for a game to last for 2.5 hours. As for today's football game, although it wasn't an NFL game, it still lasted for about 2 hours. In the end, Winthrop won the game 37-30. The hero of the game was naturally Cersei. This guy scored 5 touchdowns and was the biggest contributor to today's victory. At the end of the game, Winthrop's people had already carried him up. And he also sat on everyone's shoulders, waving his arms vigorously. This victory was indeed very good. As for Chelsea's side, they were a little depressed. Indeed, the people on the Chelsea team were more aggressive. After all, they were all hired thugs. Oh no, they were hired as security guards. Their ferocity might be useful against those professional football players, but it was useless against some fishermen who relied on the sea for their livelihood all day long. Speaking of aggressiveness, these fishermen were much more valiant than them. After all, when they encountered other fishing boats overseas, conflict was inevitable. At least they were not afraid and dared to have physical contact. Their skills were better than the security guards, so it was inevitable that they would win the competition. In a while, we'll go to Old Tony's to buy some wine. What do you want to drink? It's my treat today. Jiang Hai clapped his hands and said loudly as he looked at the people walking towards him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, these people burst into even louder cheers. After celebrating for about 10 minutes, Winthrop temporarily suppressed their mood because the Chelsea people had arrived. Of course, they were not here to pick a fight. As a member of this regional league, they were tough and dirty. But at the very least, their boss could still afford to lose. They still cared about their reputation. Therefore, they just came over to shake hands and say hello before leaving. Although some of the Winthrop players still had smiles on their faces, they did not ridicule the other party too much. After all, they were all from the neighboring town and would see each other often. There was no need to make things worse because of a competition. Moreover, they were not mortal enemies. You did a great job today. Congratulations. The Chelsea boss and captain shook hands with the Winthrop captain and said with a smile. Hearing what he said, the captain naturally smiled and replied with a few words. After a few simple greetings, the man walked to Jiang Hai's side. While he was sizing up Jiang Hai was also sizing up the guy. According to Delilah's introduction, the other team's captain was not simple. But it looked like there was no difference. This guy was about 1.78 meters tall, which was not considered tall in the United States. He looked to be in his 30s with a blonde buzz cut. His face had a sense of vicissitudes. He was not handsome, definitely not handsome. He could only be said to be very ordinary. But such an ordinary person had a great reputation around here. Of course, this reputation was not very good. How could a gambler have a good reputation? Hello, my name is Kristen Adis. I run a casino in Chelsea. If you are interested, you can come and play. After sizing up the other person's hand, Kristen Adis could not help but stretch out his hand and said to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai, nice to meet you, but I don't have much talent for gambling. Looking at his outstretched hand, Jiang Hai shook it and then said with a smile. Hearing that Jiang Hai had no intention of getting to know him, Kristen Adis did not care. After shrugging, he said goodbye to his teammates and left with his men. Jiang, this guy is not a good person. It's best not to get too close to him in the future. Looking at the leaving Kristen Adis, Serge came over and whispered to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled. In fact, needless to say, he also knew that this guy was not a good person. Well, let's forget about him, let's go celebrate. For Jiang Hai, it is impossible for him to take the initiative to gamble, so this person is probably just a passerby with him. Turning his head, Jiang Hai looked at the crowd behind him and said loudly. Wow! As soon as they heard Jiang Hai say that he was going to celebrate, everyone naturally wouldn't be polite and shouted loudly. Then Jiang Hai and others drove together and left Boston. They first went to Old Tony's Cowboy Song Bar in Winthrop. There, they moved a lot of beer and some good quality wine to Serge's house. At this time, Serge's house was already prepared. There were barbecue racks and cured meat. After ordering 10 large portions of pizza, the party officially began. In the warehouse mixed with engine oil, the young people were having a good time, drinking beer and eating barbecue, but there was no noisy music. There was originally music, but because Serge knew that Jiang Hai didn't like it, she cancelled it. However, although there was no music, the atmosphere at the scene was still quite lively. Jiang Hai took a large bottle of beer and a large plate of barbecue meat, then went to a corner to eat. Although he wanted to integrate into this town, he was not familiar with it. To be honest, he was still not familiar with this place. He was not very good at making friends with strangers. What are you doing here alone? However, at this time, Delia couldn't help but smile as she walked over. She held a bottle of cocktail in her hand and sat beside Jiang Hai. This kind of cocktail was actually a pre-mixed cocktail. It was still very popular in the country, like the famous Rui Ao. Jiang Hai had drunk it before, but this was the United States, while Rui Ao was from Japan. Here, people preferred to drink Bacardi. Of course, this kind of cocktail was also sold in the country. The red and green color was very beautiful. The taste is also good and it is very popular with women, but Jiang Hai does not like to drink this kind of wine. He prefers to drink beer. I don't know anyone, so I'm here to fill my stomach first. Looking at Delia, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Are you full? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia smiled and looked at Jiang Hai, then asked. Almost, what's the matter? Jiang Hai sensed that the plate of meat was finished. It was impossible to say that he was full, but at the same time, he wasn't that hungry. Looking at Delia in front of him, Jiang Hai curiously asked. If you are full, I will take you to see something. Delia finished speaking, stood up with a smile, and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai was also a little curious. What is there to see? So after hesitating for a moment, he put down the beer glass and plate in his hand and followed Delia. Delia led Jiang Hai through the crowd without attracting anyone's attention. She led Jiang Hai straight to the second floor of the factory. But as soon as they came up, Jiang Hai was stunned. Because at the corner of the second floor, a man and a woman were kissing passionately. The man's upper body was already red, and the woman's coat had been thrown far away. The man's hands were also reaching into the woman's clothes. They should be warming up, it seems. After the two saw Jiang Hai coming, they did not care about Jiang Hai and were still kissing passionately. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai felt a bit guilty. The reason he followed Delia was because it was daytime. He didn't think that Delia would do anything to him during the day. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai was curious about the second reason. But now, it seemed like he had underestimated Delia. Jiang Hai was a bit surprised. But now, it seemed like he had underestimated Delia. Okay, let's do it here. I want to show you this. Just as Jiang Hai was hesitating whether to run or not, Delia suddenly stopped in front of him and pulled Jiang Hai into the bathroom on the second floor. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, she instantly lifted her top, and then two abnormally plump breasts appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes drifted elsewhere. Delia, it's not good for you to do this. You have a boyfriend, and you know my situation. It's impossible between you and me. If something happens, I won't be able to explain it to old George. Feeling Delia's footsteps, Jiang Hai could not help but take a step back. Then, he looked to the side and said seriously. Hey, Jiang, I don't want to have any emotional disputes with you. I still love my new boyfriend very much, at least for now. I know you're not a good person, so I don't want to be your girlfriend. I'm just interested in you, so you don't need to feel burdened. If you want to fit in with us, you need to let go. Chapter 627. Cough, that's not right. Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai took another step back, his body even leaning against the door. It was the first time he had been so passive, and it was indeed somewhat baffling. I'm already 19 years old. I became an adult last year, so I don't need you to tell me what's right and what's wrong. Feel it? Don't you like it? Looking at Jiang Hai's old-fashioned appearance, Delia could not help but smile. She had heard before that Easterners were still very concerned about this thing and were not as open-minded as Westerners. Now it seemed that Jiang Hai was a very traditional young man. As she spoke, she had already taken a step forward and pulled Jiang Hai's hands with both hands, placing them on two places where they should not be placed. At the same time, her hands also placed on the things that Jiang Hai should not be placing on. Wow, this shape, it can't be. But as soon as her hands touched, Delia could not help but exclaim. Don't. Feeling Delia's movements, Jiang Hai immediately wanted to stop her, but unfortunately, Delia had already taken off Jiang Hai's pants. For the first time, Jiang Hai felt that wearing pants without a belt was not very good, but the instant chill made him understand that his existence had already been seen by Delia. Looking at the behemoth in front of her, Delia swallowed her saliva. Delia swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, without giving Jiang Hai a chance to resist, she knelt down and lowered her head. Hiss. Feeling that different feeling, Jiang Hai could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. And in his mind, the impulse brought about by the Dragon Balls was about to devour him. Jiang Hai was originally not a person who could not control himself, but ever since he had the Dragon Balls, his desire for more and more increased. His needs in this area were getting higher and higher, and he was getting less and less able to control himself. This might be the only side effect of the Dragon Balls. If Delia and Kelly had talked it over, then Jiang Hai might not have had any problems. Just like the day before yesterday, although they had made it clear and hinted so many times, Jiang Hai was still able to get away. But when the other party forced herself on him, Jiang Hai was stunned, and his rationality would be instantly swallowed by his desire. It was not until he turned into sage mode that his rationality returned. Of course, he was sober at this time, but his desire was really too strong. It was the same this time. In less than 3 minutes, Delia found that Jiang Hai's waist began to move, which made her delighted. But after more than 10 minutes, Delia discovered that Jiang Hai didn't seem to have any intention of turning into sage mode. I can't, my mouth is so sore. After forcibly pushing Jiang Hai away, Delia half knelt on the ground and said to Jiang Hai somewhat pitifully. However, Jiang Hai did not recover, but his consciousness was still there, and he knew that she was telling the truth. And now, it seemed to be a good time to start directly. Then Jiang Hai pulled her up, let her support her hands against the wall, and then removed the thing she could not describe, and then did it in one go. Wow, two inside, don't you wear a raincoat? Feeling Jiang Hai's movements, Delia could not help but exclaim in a low voice, and then said with some worry. Are you afraid of being sick? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. No one had ever said this to him before. That's not it. A rich person like you would definitely not let yourself be sick, but I'm afraid of having a baby. If I give birth to a yellow man in the future, how can I explain it? I have a boyfriend. Delia said softly as she glanced at Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai ignored her and began to move. Just get it outside in a while. Jiang Hai whispered to Delia as he continued to move. Looking at Jiang Hai, Delia whispered into Jiang Hai's ear, get it into my mouth, I like it. Next was the part that could not be described, although there were many parts above that could not be described. But when Jiang Hai did things, he always needed some impulse and passion, and these were the ones. Sometimes, people would feel that time passed very slowly, and sometimes it would feel that time passed very quickly. Just like when doing this kind of thing, time passed very quickly. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. When Jiang Hai resisted and came out, Delia's mouth. When he thought of the key words, he also let out a long sigh and then sat weakly on the toilet next to him. As for Delia, she had already lost all her strength. After swallowing a mouthful, she wiped her face and the corner of her mouth with her hand, and then gently licked them clean. Then, she sat on the ground, constantly panting. Are you okay? Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai asked softly. Now that he had returned to his saintly state, he felt that he had done something wrong. After all, Delia's father knew him, and she was someone else's girlfriend. As for what other people would do if they encountered such a thing, Jiang Hai did not know, but he felt somewhat guilty. It's okay, it's really great. It's the best experience I've ever had. Jiang Hai, you're really a perfect lover. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia raised her thumb and said with a look of approval. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also felt a little awkward. At this time, no matter how he replied, it seemed that it would be wrong. Hey! Delia, how do you want me to say this? After all, you have a boyfriend, and I know your father. I said before, I can't give you anything. Of course, if you want to buy something, you can look for me. Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai helplessly sighed. What is this called? I'm also making money now. Huh, Jiang, I have to admit that you're really cute. I don't want anything when I do this with you. This is the United States, and this is very normal. I want to integrate into our lives, so you need to try to understand us. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia could not help but smile. Then she slowly stood up and came to Jiang Hai's side, sitting directly on Jiang Hai's lap. At the same time, her pair of plump breasts pressed against Jiang Hai's chin. In America, it's normal for friends to occasionally do unspeakable things. Everyone needs to vent. Men need to do it, and so do women. So, if you're not looking for someone with a clear goal, there's nothing wrong with it. That's why we still know how to restrain ourselves. When our father was young, in the 1980s, Americans were the most open-minded. I heard that hormones were everywhere at that time, and the relationships between men and women were so messy that it made one's hair stand on end. Even within the same family, it was quite common for cousins to have sex. Of course, you couldn't have babies. Of course, it's not possible to have children. Looking at Jiang Hai, Delia smiled and said. Indeed, men and women in the United States did not pay much attention to these things. Many men and women had already done it when they were in junior high school. Of course, there was no junior high school in the United States. Junior high school and high school were connected. There were also schools that were connected to junior high school, and elementary school. But at that time, exploration of the opposite sex was not rare in the United States. On the contrary, there were not many people in the United States who had psychological burdens like Jiang Hai. Of course, those with ulterior motives were different. Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai could not help but be speechless. What kind of fallacy is this? Messing around with men and women became an important node for me to integrate into this small town? It's too much of a joke. Okay, don't feel burdened. Let me hug you for a while. I'm really tired, and I don't want to leave you. Feeling that Jiang Hai's mood might be a little better, Delia also hugged Jiang Hai's head and said with a smile. Kaka. At this moment, there was suddenly the sound of a key turning outside the bathroom door. It startled Jiang Hai, but at this time, there was nothing in the bathroom at all. What should he do? Before he could figure it out, the door had been opened. Then Kelly Soren's little face, which was a little red from wine, appeared outside the door. After seeing Jiang Hai and Delia inside, she could not help but glare at them bitterly. Then, in a flash, she entered the bathroom, locked the door behind her, and walked quickly to the two. Hey, Delia, you already have a boyfriend. Why are you still clinging to Jiang Hai? Grabbing Delia's arm, Kelly Soren directly pulled her up from Jiang Hai's body, then looked at her and said with a displeased expression. Hey, dear Kelly, we're just hugging each other for warmth. I'll help you try it. I have to tell you, Jiang Hai really has this. That's great. Looking at the angry Kelly, Delia chuckled and then gave Kelly a thumbs up. Of course, she was talking about Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Kelly could not help but raise her eyebrows. She glanced at Jiang Hai's naked lower body and looked at Jiang Hai with some complaints. Then, she sat on Jiang Hai's lap and took off her shirt in an instant. Since you said you're helping me try it, then I'll try it myself. Looking at the dazed Jiang Hai in front of her, Kelly said fiercely. Then, she pulled Jiang Hai's face with both hands and kissed him directly. Feeling Kelly's breath and the taste of alcohol in his mouth, Jiang Hai reacted. He was just about to push her away, but his hand was grabbed by Delia. Of course, my friend, I'm here to help you. Looking at Delia's smile, Jiang Hai felt that it would be difficult for him to escape unscathed. When Delia pressed Jiang Hai's hand on the two places on Kelly's body that could not be described, Jiang Hai felt that he seemed to be unable to control himself again. Perhaps, as they said, he wanted to integrate into the other party's world. First, he wanted the other party to have similar habits, and their habits toward Jiang Hai were obviously not so pure. But as a man, in the face of such habits, Jiang Hai could not say anything because he did not know who was taking advantage of him. Chapter 628. You're back, why are you so late? Seeing Jiang Hai walk in, Bernice, who was leaning on the sofa and eating blue plums, asked with some confusion. As she spoke, she stuffed a few more blue plums into her mouth. Her fingertips and mouth were bluish-purple, as if she was poisoned, but Jiang Hai didn't have the time to make fun of her today. Oh, I drank a little too much at noon, so I rested at his place. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai smiled, walked to the sofa, then sat down directly, looked up at the light, and then slowly looked back at his big fish tank. What's wrong? Haven't you recovered yet? Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice couldn't help but ask Jiang Hai with some confusion. No, I've recovered, but there are some. Well, I don't quite understand. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai immediately raised his head and said with a chuckle. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai was still a little flustered. He went to watch the game today, then went to Chelsea's place, and what he did, there was no need to say. With Kelly joining the battle later, Jiang Hai and the others stayed in the bathroom upstairs for an entire afternoon. Fortunately, Chelsea's house has a total of 4 bathrooms, 1 upstairs, 1 downstairs, 1 in the warehouse, and 1 in the reception room. Otherwise, they would be suffocated. By the time Jiang Hai helped Kelly and Delia out, it was already past 6:00 in the evening. Most people had already left, and the owner, Chelsea, also drank too much and collapsed on the sofa. Jiang Hai didn't say much and helped the two leave. Of course, he only came back after sending them back to their respective homes. But even though he came back, Jiang Hai was still a little confused about what Kelly and Delia said this afternoon. What do you not understand? Tell me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice turned around and looked at Jiang Hai with some confusion. Looking at her, Jiang Hai also turned his head and looked at Bernice. He thought about it in his mind. Maybe if he talked to Bernice, she might give him an answer. It's like this, I've been trying to integrate with the people in the town recently, but I found out today that I'm really different from the people in the town. I can tolerate other things, but the problem is that I can't accept fighting. It's like the Americans are very relaxed about fighting. They don't have much sense of moral betrayal, which makes me a little puzzled. Looking at Bernice, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. He didn't tell the complete truth, but she should be able to understand if he said it this way. This. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice's face suddenly turned red. She was still a young girl. She was still a little uncomfortable when Jiang Hai asked her such things, but she was asking for it. If she didn't answer, it didn't seem too good. So after a little hesitation, she explained to Jiang Hai. Let's talk about education in America. Let's talk about the education in China and the United States. In the United States, there are 2 types of education. One is similar to the education you see today, a pure American education. They will teach the children about combat when they are very young to prevent any problems. But it is also because of this that the children in the United States are very curious about this aspect. When their physical conditions allow it, they may try it. Bernice thought for a moment and said hesitantly. As she said, education in this area was indeed very early in the United States, but it also developed into 2 extremes. One kind was the Catholic family. They were very strict about fighting because in their view, if one's body was impure or had an abortion, they would die without a burial place. Therefore, generally speaking, the Catholic family was very strict about this aspect. But most ordinary American families were very casual about the management in this area. They didn't care about their children knowing the other half when they were 13 or 14 years old. Of course, they had to be prepared for it. Although Catholicism was the world's largest religion, there were definitely not many people who didn't believe in it. This created the mainstream impression in the United States. Wuxia had always been very conservative in this area. They began to set up education in this area after high school, so the current environment in the country was very chaotic. But in fact, after graduating from high school, most of the boys and girls in the country had not fought before. At least 70% of them had not fought before. But in the United States, more than 80% of them had fought before. This was also one of the reasons why the media in the two countries criticized each other. The domestic media would say that the combat education in the West was earlier and more advanced. It could let the children know more, and this was beneficial for the children's development. On the other hand, the Western media would criticize their own government for introducing combat education too early. This would make the children develop a bad interest and curiosity in these things, and thus, they would try it out. This was not beneficial to the children's development. Of course, both sides had their reasons. This was only the media's criticism. After all, foreign things could not be forced on a country. For example, if the same thing was used on Wuxia in the United States, Wuxia would probably be in chaos. Because people had too much power, they would become arrogant. Wuxia had never lacked ambitious people since ancient times, and it was hard to say whether they would use proper means to obtain the power they wanted. So, Wuxia would be in chaos. And if the same thing was used on the United States in the Wuxia, the United States would also be in chaos. The Americans were used to freedom. If you suddenly ask them to pay for their own medical care, pension insurance, and social welfare, and if they lost their jobs, they would have to find a job themselves. Every day, they would have to work hard for a few square meters of house. They would definitely rebel. Therefore, different national conditions meant different natural environments. However, Jiang Hai was now a Wuxia citizen in the United States. Since he had to find a way to integrate into this country, it would be very troublesome. Otherwise, he would have to abandon the habits he had developed in the country all these years and integrate into the country like an American. But he was not willing to do so. He had some things on him that he would not throw away no matter what. But this collision of Eastern and Western cultures really made him feel a little overwhelmed. In the United States, this Western world, before a man and a woman were married, the restrictions on each other were not very strict. Things like delias were very common. After all, they did not get along with each other for the purpose of marriage. But in China, since a man and a woman had confirmed their relationship, if one of them cheated, it would be a big mistake. Who would play it down like this? Unless it was those white-collar workers who pursued a one-night stand or something like that. Otherwise, why would someone act like this? Jiang Hai was not a white-collar worker. He would not pursue a one-night stand or anything like that. He did not lack women. This kind of cultural shock really made him feel a little overwhelmed. That was why he asked Bernice. But after a long time, Bernice still could not explain it clearly. Because she did not really understand these things. Hey, after a long time, you still don't understand. In short, if you feel that there is a way to integrate into this group and you are willing to do it, then you can give it a try. For example, go to a party or watch their football game. These are also things that I want you to do. But if you have some doubts about some things, then you don't have to follow the American attitude. For example, this thing, understand? Seeing that Jiang Hai had listened to her for a long time and still had some confusion in his eyes, Bernice pursed her lips. In fact, she had already started scolding him in her heart. This Jiang Hai was really annoying. Did he not know that she was a big girl? How shy would she be if he asked her that? Although she was used to learning Chinese and Western culture, she was still a traditional Wuxia girl in her bones. After saying so much, she felt that she had already broken through her limits. But if she did not explain it clearly, she was afraid that Jiang Hai would mess around. So after saying that last sentence, Bernice stood up. She did not care about the pot of blue plum beside her and directly ran back to her room. She needed to digest it properly. If I'm willing to try, I can try. If I'm not willing to try, can I not try? This seems to work. Jiang Hai took out a few blue plums from the big bowl and threw them into his mouth. As he ate, he muttered softly. He felt that he wasn't himself this afternoon. This wasn't good news. Unknowingly, this was what Jiang Hai was thinking. He sat on the sofa and ate the blue plums while unconsciously watching the TV in front of him. Aphrodite and the others did not come over tonight. There was no one else in Jiang Hai's room, so he had a lot of time to think about some things. After an unknown amount of time, when the last blue plum was thrown into Jiang Hai's mouth, he could not help but shudder. After that, Jiang Hai felt a little strange. With his physical fitness, why would he shudder? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai could not help but look into the distance. In the end, he happened to see the living room's window flapping in the wind. Looking through the window, Jiang Hai's eyes could not help but brighten. He only saw that the large expanse of snowflakes had fallen from the sky at some point. The entire world had unknowingly changed into a white coat. Putting the bowl aside, Jiang Hai stood up and walked to the window. He glanced at the snow on the windowsill. It was almost 2 or 3 centimeters thick. Looking out again, it was pitch black. Not to mention stars, there was not even a moon tonight. Oh, it's snowing. And it looks like it won't be small. Looking at the pitch-black sky outside, Jiang Hai's face showed a smile for the first time since he returned home. He was still very familiar with such a scene. Because his hometown would also have such heavy snow at this time, but now his home was in Winthrop. Chapter 629. Boston was not very good at this point. It got cold too quickly. In fact, Boston's latitude was about 41 degrees, which was the same as the latitude of the imperial capital in China. But when it started to get cold here, it was almost the same as Jiang Hai's hometown, Bingcheng. In many countries, the first snow actually had a lot of meaning, but for Jiang Hai, snow was just snow. It had no meaning. After seeing the snow last night, Jiang Hai closed all the windows and turned on the geothermal. But even so, he didn't sleep very well this night. After all, the windows had been open for a long time. When they were suddenly closed, he really felt a little suffocated. It was rare for Jiang Hai to wake up at 6:00 again. But at 6:00 in Boston, the sky had just begun to brighten. He opened the bedroom window to let some air in. As soon as the window was opened, the cold wind rushed in instantly. It was so cold that Jiang Hai couldn't help but shiver. The weapon under his crotch couldn't help but twitch. Hiss, it's really strong, but it seems that winter is here. Looking at the white expanse outside the snow, Jiang Hai couldn't help but whisper. Although he was a northerner, he obviously liked summer more than winter. Shrinking his neck, Jiang Hai went to the bathroom to wash up, then changed his clothes and went downstairs. He found that little Huang and Xiaobai were a little lazy today, but Jiang Hai didn't care about them and opened the door directly. When the door opened, the cold wind poured into Jiang Hai's villa in an instant. At this time, little Huang, Xiaobai, and Qiuqiu, who were sleeping on the warm floor, reacted almost instantly. They looked at Jiang Hai with resentment. This guy is too annoying. After getting used to it, Jiang Hai simply stretched, exhaled a breath of white air, and prepared to go to the warehouse at the cowshed. Recently, he had to go to the warehouse every morning to help bale grass. Although he was the boss, he couldn't just do nothing, right? But before he left, he saw Robbins Garcia and the others coming out of the warehouse with some things. "Hi, Robbins Garcia, aren't you bale grass today? Seeing them come over, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ask with some doubts. Boss, where are we going to get grass? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia glanced around, then said helplessly. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai was also dumbfounded for a moment, then laughed self-deprecatingly. Yes, it's snowing everywhere, where are we going to find grass? Thinking of this, he felt a little awkward in the air. By the way, boss, let's help you clear the ground here first. Maybe he felt Jiang Hai's awkwardness. As a qualified lackey, Robbins Garcia immediately changed the topic and said with a serious face. The snow is not very thick, there's no need to clear it. He raised his feet and looked. Although the snow last night was not light, it was not particularly heavy. After all, it was just the first snow. Although Jiang Hai did not eat fried chicken or drink beer, the snow was indeed not heavy. Now it looks like it's only 3 or 4 centimeters thick, which is far worse than last winter. It's because the snow is thin that we need to deal with it immediately because the weather is not that cold. Today's weather forecast said that it will be 13 degrees. The snow will turn into water at noon, and then it will freeze again at night before it dries. Robbins Garcia said to Jiang Hai when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also nodded. Indeed, after the snow turns into water, it will be troublesome when it freezes again. Jiang Hai also doesn't want his house to be so slippery, so he immediately agreed and picked up a broom to help. When it first snowed last year, it was already the end of November, and the first snow at that time was quite heavy. A broom was not very useful in that kind of snow, but now there is only a few centimeters of thin snow, so a broom is the best thing. On the contrary, shovels and the like are not very effective. The grassland does not care whether there is snow or not, so Jiang Hai only needs to clear the road and the parking lot in front of the house. Today, Edward Anderson and the others are not in a hurry to go to the dock. They all came to help. It is said that there is strength in numbers, and this is really true. Jiang Hai and the others started sweeping at 6 o'clock, and they were all done by about 8 o'clock. Jiang Hai also deliberately drove the helicopter around the manor with Marlon Rupert. After making sure that there is no road left unswept, he returned home. When he returned home, Bernice, Xiaoya, Daliana, Marian, and Azalina were already up. Xiaoya had also prepared breakfast. Everyone gathered around the table and started eating. When did it snow last night? It actually snowed so heavily. While eating Xiaoya's wontons, Bernice asked with some doubts. She didn't notice that it was snowing outside when she went to bed last night. You just left not long ago, I don't remember. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai recalled for a moment. He also forgot when Bernice left. He only remembered that after seeing the snow, he went upstairs to sleep. It's snowing today, do you have any activities? Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice asked with a smile. I don't think so, just stay at home. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai curled his lips. He had to admit that during the summer, Jiang Hai wasn't too idle. He still had some things to do. But when it came to winter, he really didn't have anything to do. Last winter, he played basketball and fished for the whole winter. But last year, he was alone, so it didn't matter. This year, there were so many people around him, so he couldn't play basketball and fish. Moreover, after that addiction passed, he didn't like these two hobbies so much. If you ask him now what he is going to do in winter, he is a little confused because he doesn't know what he is going to do. If you have nothing to do today, let's go make tanghulu. Seeing that Jiang Hai had nothing to do, Bernice thought for a moment and suddenly said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her proposal, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then touched his chin. This is also okay. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai felt that making tanghulu was not bad. Tanghulu is a traditional snack of Wuxia. It is available all over the country. He believes that people in Wuxia are not unfamiliar with this snack. The method is also very simple. Use a bamboo stick to skewer the fruit you want to eat. The most common one is mountain dregs. Of course, there are many different kinds now, such as grapes, kiwi, peaches, apples, oranges, grass, and so on. There are all kinds of fruits. Then use the boiled sugar to cook it, and then cool it down. It is very delicious. However, in terms of cooling, one thing was very important, and that was to freeze it. The taste of frozen candied haws was very different from that of unfrozen ones. But if you put these candied haws in the cold storage or the refrigerator, the effect wouldn't be very good. The best effect was to use the weather to freeze it. Then, the taste would be quite good. In fact, Bernice said that she wanted to eat this thing in the autumn. This was because Jianghai had a lot of fruit trees. Autumn was the time to harvest them. Looking at those fruits, she was a little greedy. But at that time, the weather wasn't cold enough, so Jianghai didn't do it. Now that the weather was cold, it was possible to do it. Great, then let's eat together. Hearing that Jianghai agreed to make it, Bernice couldn't help but smile. Then she said to the girls next to her. Hearing Bernice's words, Xiaoya was very excited because she has eaten it before. But Delina and Marian looked at each other. They really haven't eaten this thing before. But seeing Bernice and Xiaoya's excited appearance, they were also very interested. Only Azalina shrugged her shoulders. She had eaten this thing before, but she didn't think that it was delicious. But since everyone wanted to make it, she was no exception. Since everyone agreed to do this, everyone's eating speed increased a lot. After eating, Jianghai and Bernice went to the warehouse where the fruits were stored to see what they were going to do with it. Jianghai liked to eat fruits, and because of the spiritual qi here, the fruits were growing quite well. Although he didn't intend to sell fruits, he planted a lot of them at home. Hawthorns, blue plums, kiwis, nectarines, cherries, and so on. He had everything. Looking at these fruits, Bernice's appetite was aroused. After looking around, Jianghai picked up a lot of things to eat. Then he carried them back to the villa. After bringing the fruits back, they began to prepare. Removing the seeds and peeling, these things didn't need Jianghai's help as Bernice already knew. But there was a problem, they didn't have any bamboo sticks or rock candy. This gave the girls a headache. I'll go to the town. But Jianghai didn't care. Then he decided to go to the town and see if he could buy it. He knew that he could buy bamboo sticks. This was because in the United States, some people like to eat barbecued meat with bamboo sticks. It was said that people from the Middle East and Wuxia spread the news. During the last barbecue party, Jianghai ate a lot of barbecued meat with bamboo sticks. So he could definitely buy bamboo sticks. But for rock candy, he would have to try his luck. Americans like to eat sugar, granulated sugar, soft sugar, caramel sugar, maple sugar. They like to eat all kinds of sugar. But Jianghai wasn't sure if there was any rock sugar in the United States. So after talking to everyone, Jianghai drove to the town. When his car drove out of the manor, he saw a cleaning truck on the road of the town. After giving way to the snow removal truck, Jianghai drove into the town. But as soon as he entered, he found that the town was very busy. At this time, everyone was cleaning up the snow from yesterday. It seems that except for the time when the town was being renovated, there wasn't such a busy time. When they saw Jianghai again, they didn't know if it was because Jianghai had participated in the two parties and went to watch the town's football team play. This time, when Jianghai came to the town, at least the young people were more friendly to Jianghai. Some people began to take the initiative to greet Jianghai. This was a good start. After parking the car in the parking lot, Jiang Hai tightened his clothes and went to a supermarket on the business street. Supermarket was the abbreviation for supermarket, but in fact, this was not a supermarket. It was more like a convenience store. But even so, the daily sales here weren't low. Even if it was winter in Winthrop, there were still some people who came here to play. At least in this shop, there were more than a dozen people buying things. Many of them were Wuxia people. In addition to buying some daily necessities, many Wuxia people would also take some cigarettes here when they left. This was a habit of the Chinese people. Although Jiang Hai did not smoke, he had some understanding of the cigarettes in the United States. When it came to cigarettes in the United States, 9 out of 10 people would think of Marlboro. But in fact, Marlboro was a Swiss brand and had nothing to do with the United States. But the sales in the United States were the highest. In the United States, the most popular cigarette brand was Camel, followed by Winston, Good Fortune, and another brand called American Spirit. There was a picture of a smoking Native American on the outside of the cigarette box. It was said that this type of cigarette did not contain any essence and was made from pure tobacco leaves. It was very popular in the United States, but it was also very strong. Other than American Spirit, the best-selling cigarette was White Marlboro. At this time, the Wuxia tourists in the shop were all picking cigarettes. Each person could only bring 2 cigarettes back to China, so there were not many choices. This shop was Jiang Hai's shop. He rented it, so when Jiang Hai walked in, he was stopped by the shop manager. "Hi, Jiang, you are here. What do you want to buy?" Seeing Jiang Hai walk in, the shop manager, a bearded man, said with a smile. His current life was closely related to Jiang Hai. Moreover, he also heard that Jiang Hai wanted to integrate into this place. Therefore, he would not be stingy to show his goodwill. "Oh, hello, you are Luo Lin." Seeing the bearded shop manager come over to greet him, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment. After thinking for a long time, he did not call out this person's name. Indeed, he was not familiar with the people in Winthrop. "Luo Lin Canal. It's good that you remember my name. Is there anything you want to buy?" Hearing that Jiang Hai still remembered that his name was Luo Lin, the big bearded man was very happy. He asked Jiang Hai with a happy face. Chapter 630. Let me ask, do you have any bamboo sticks and rock candy? Hearing Luo Lin's words, Jiang Hai also chuckled. He had to admit that sometimes these Americans were quite friendly. He glanced at the supermarket and said to Luo Lin. "Bamboo sticks? Wooden sticks, right? They're inside. As for rock candy, what kind? Food? Drink?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Luo Lin froze for a moment, then whispered to Jiang Hai. Looking at his mysterious appearance, Jiang Hai was also somewhat at a loss. There is a word in English for rock candy, but this word is not as beautiful as imagined. In China, rock candy was rock candy. Everyone would know what it was. But in the United States, rock candy was written in English as candy. It meant candy, or fancy clothing, or sweet words. There was also another explanation, which was gu ku, 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 and so on. So when he heard Jiang Hai say that he wanted this thing, Luo Lin also gestured with his hands. "Oh, no, I don't touch these things. I want to eat rock candy. Whole, translucent candy. Put it in your mouth and eat it." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai immediately shook his head. "He will not touch these messy things." You scared me. The candy is in the 3rd row. You can go look for it. I don't know if it's there or not." Seeing that Jiang Hai did not look for those things, Luo Lin also breathed a sigh of relief. Although in the United States, there are places where smoking marijuana is not illegal, but these drugs are illegal everywhere. Plus, these are not good things. He does not want Jiang Hai to be involved in these things. Smiling at him, Jiang Hai walked to the corner of the third row. As a result, he found that there were a lot of sweets and all kinds of sweets. Americans really like to eat sweets, they really like to eat sweets. Every year, the average adult in the country absorbs 22 spoons of sweets every day, which is more than 100 grams, which is about 2 ounces. That's an average of every day, not every month, not every year. Maybe Americans don't know what healthcare is, or maybe they really like to eat candy and have immunity. Otherwise, how can they not be afraid of diabetes? As for teenagers, well, they eat candy even more fiercely, 34 spoons a day. Almost all of their snacks are sweet, not to mention the national food pie, donuts, chocolate, and so on. These high-calorie, high-sugar foods are their favorite. This can be seen from the variety of candies here. Jiang Hai walked to the counter and squatted down to take a look. He found rock candy here, which saves a lot of trouble. He took 2 bags of rock candy and went to the side to get bamboo skewers. Oh, no, wooden skewers. There is almost no bamboo in the United States, and they do not use bamboo. Among the 3 major types of bamboo in the world, Asian bamboo is the most widely used. American bamboo only grows in Latin America. Even if there is bamboo in the United States, it is very rare, and no one will cut it. But it does not matter if he uses wooden skewers. After getting the candy in wooden skewers, Jiang Hai was about to pay the bill. But when he passed by the counter, he saw a shelf selling drinks. So, Jiang Hai took a bottle of Coca-Cola 0 degrees. A long time ago, he liked drinking 0 degrees. When this drink was launched, it attracted a lot of attention. But later, it was unknown if it was because of the suppression of the industry, or if there was really a problem, but the aspartame used in 0 degrees was exposed as a cancer-causing substance. For a period of time, it was taken off the shelves all over the world. But later, for some reason, it reappeared. Jiang Hai did not know whether it was cancer-causing or not, but Jiang Hai knew that it did not have many calories, so it was fine to drink. Jiang Hai took the 3 items to the counter and was about to pay the bill. But at that moment, a man in Indian clothing walked in and stood behind Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai was familiar with this man. He was an Iroquois. When Jiang Hai and Mayor Wallace were discussing setting up a Native American store in the town, Mayor Wallace went to the mountains and met with the Iroquois. Then, he came forward to facilitate this matter. This Iroquois was the most business-minded among the Iroquois tribe in the mountains. When he heard about this, he persuaded the chief of his tribe to come out of the mountains and become the manager of this small store. Indeed, if an Indian store was not being sold by a Native American, it would more or less give people the impression that it was selling dog meat under false pretenses. It was because of this Iroquois that the store's business was quite good. According to Moses Adams' calculations, the Indian store's total revenue in the 3 months of August, September, and October alone was $700,000. After deducting the $200,000 spent on purchasing goods, the store made a net profit of $500,000. Jiang Hai got 40%, which was $200,000. The town got 20%, which was $100,000, and the Iroquois got 40%, which was $200,000. Of course, the most important thing was that these goods were all bought from the Iroquois. In other words, they had earned a total of $400,000. This Iroquois, who was always in the limelight, naturally made a lot of money. Originally, he had rented a house to live in, but recently, Jiang Hai heard that he was going to buy a house in town. "Hey, Jiang, you're here to buy something too?" While Jiang Hai was sizing him up, the Iroquois, who had been looking up as if he was thinking about what to buy, also noticed Jiang Hai. He called out excitedly, but his accent was a little strange. "Yes, you're here to buy something too." Although his accent was a little strange, Jiang Hai still understood what he was saying. "I ran out of cigarettes, so I came to buy some." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man could not help but smile and say. When this man came, Jiang Hai remembered that he was reluctant to buy cigarettes. Instead, he just rolled up the tobacco leaves he brought from the mountains to smoke. Although it was strong and natural, it was not very comfortable to smoke. His mouth was full of smoke. Now that he had money, he naturally wanted to buy something better. When Jiang Hai heard him, he smiled and chatted with him. After chatting for a while, it was Jiang Hai's turn. After paying for these things, Jiang Hai left the supermarket. He opened the can of Coke and took a sip. After a while, he took a big gulp. It was indeed much more comfortable. As he walked, Jiang Hai drank. As for the people on the road, they kept saying hello to Jiang Hai. For their kindness, Jiang Hai responded to them with a smile. Unknowingly, he also walked to the parking lot. After getting in the car, Jiang Hai drove back to the manor. When he came, there was still some snow on the road. Although the snowplow swept more snow to the roadside, there was still some snow in the middle of the road. At this time, when the sun came out, the snow became water. It was fine to walk now, but if it froze at night, it would be troublesome. Looking at the situation on the road, Jiang Hai felt that if there was nothing important, he should not go to the town these days. After driving all the way back to his manor, Jiang Hai got out of the car and took the things into the house. At this time, Daliana and the others had already finished preparing the fruits. Logically speaking, when skewering candied haws, such as hawthorn, the hawthorn should be cut from the middle, then the seeds inside should be removed, and then the hawthorn should be closed. Then, the hawthorn should be skewered with bamboo sticks. There was a problem with skewers, and that was, the butt of the hawthorn would not be delicious. Therefore, what Bernice and the others did was to use chopsticks to stab the hawthorn through its butt. This way, the seeds would be directly removed, and the butt would also fall. Although there would be less meat, it was not a big deal. As for the other things, it was much simpler. The grapes were peeled and seeded, the kiwis were peeled and cut into small pieces, the blue plum was peeled and seeded, and the grass was directly cut in half. When Jiang Hai came back, these things were almost done. Seeing that Jiang Hai came back with the wooden stick, the others also began to skewer the fruits. Unknowingly, they had already skewered dozens of skewers. There were not many hawthorn skewers left, so Jiang Hai began to boil the sugar. This was the most difficult part of making candied haws. The ratio of sugar to water was 2:1, and the mixture was poured into the pot and boiled for about 20 minutes. There must be granulated sugar and rock sugar in this sugar, and it must be boiled for 20 minutes. During the boiling, it must be stirred constantly, otherwise, it would be burnt. After 20 minutes, the sugar was boiling very fiercely, and small dense bubbles had appeared, and the color had become golden yellow. At this time, it was necessary to use chopsticks to pick it to see if it could be pulled out. When making candied sweet potatoes, this kind of sugar was also used. At this time, it was necessary to turn off the heat and speed up, because it would become caramel in a while, and then there would be no way to eat it. After putting the sugar together, they quickly took the candied haws and rolled them in the sugar. After all of them were mixed, they directly put them on the marble slab to cool. Because the marble slab itself was low in temperature, it could help the candied haws take shape, and it was very slippery. When it was fixed, these candied haws could be removed. After waiting for a long time, Bernice and the others finally saw the candied haws take shape. Bernice wanted to take a piece, but she was slapped on the back of her hand by Jiang Hai. Feeling Jiang Hai's action, Bernice couldn't help but bare her fangs and brandish her claws at Jiang Hai. "Now is not the time to eat," it has to be frozen for a night. Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh and pat her head. Sometimes, Bernice was like a child, which really made people not know whether to laugh or cry. TCH. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice couldn't help but slap her mouth, and then stared at the candied haws without moving her eyes. Well, let's play something, otherwise, it's too boring to stay at home. Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai clapped his hands and said to everyone. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, these girls' thoughts about the candied haws were really diverted. For a while, everyone in the room looked at each other, thinking, what should they play? Play poker, it's very simple. Glancing at Jiang Hai and others, Azalina spoke first. But there's no point in playing poker if you don't bet something. Hearing Azalina's words, Jiang Hai thought for a while and said. It's really boring to play poker without gambling. After all, the way poker is played is too simple. Then let's play aeroplane chess. Looking at each other, Delina couldn't help but say excitedly. But that thing can only be played by 4 people. But hearing her words, Bernice on the other side spoke up. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai and others fell into silence again, because they didn't know what to play. Otherwise, let's play 3 kingdoms. Just when everyone was a little helpless and didn't know what to play, Little Ye said next to them. Hearing Little Ye's words, Jiang Hai and others all looked at her. 3 kingdoms? Hearing Little Ye's words, Jiang Hai's mind couldn't help but flash a scene of him and his buddies playing the 3 kingdoms. But thinking about it, it has been a long time since he last played it. Well, 3 kingdoms, in the past, I could only stay in my room. It was boring to study recipes all the time. I couldn't watch TV or play with my mobile phone because there would be radiation, so I liked to play some board games and the like. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Little Ye said with a smile. Hearing what Little Ye said, Jiang Hai and others looked at each other. 3 kingdoms, what is it? As if seeing the eagerness in Jiang Hai and Little Ye's eyes, Delina and Marian couldn't help but ask strangely. They are pure Americans. They don't know what 3 kingdoms is, they don't even know about 3 kingdoms. Well, it's a very simple game, you will know after playing it. Hearing Delina and Marian's words, Jiang Hai also smiled, then signaled to Little Ye with his eyes. Little Ye immediately ran upstairs. Since Jiang Hai cured her disease, although Little Ye still looks very quiet, she is a lot more cheerful. In the past, because she couldn't get any sunlight, she was lacking calcium all year round. In addition, she had osteoporosis and a serious lack of all vitamins. It can be said that even if she wanted to run, she couldn't. Fortunately, because of Bernice's guidance all year round. So in her heart, she didn't have any inferiority complex or mental illness like autism. But now that Jiang Hai cured her, she is very cheerful. Now, if she can run, she will never walk. When eating and chatting with Jiang Hai and others, if she can sit under the sun, she will never sit in a shady place. Looking at her change, whether it is Jiang Hai or Bernice, in fact, they are happy in their hearts. Especially in Jiang Hai's view, the best thing he did was to cure her. Looking at Little Ye's slender and tall figure, her pure white and flawless body, cough. It seems to be a bit off track. Chapter 631. I'm not playing anymore. What the hell? I'm going back to sleep. Looking at his lord who had lost 5 points of blood, Jiang Hai threw the cards in his hand into the pile of cards in front of him. He was really unlucky tonight. Jiang Hai and the others started playing after they said they were going to play the 3 kingdoms tonight. However, Jiang Hai was absolutely unlucky tonight. He took Zhang Fei, but he didn't have a single killer card. He took Guan Yu, but he didn't have a single red card. He took Shen Ji, but she had a red card. He took Huang Yueying, but he didn't have a brocade card. He took De Qiao, but she didn't have a diamond card. He took Sun Quan, but he didn't have a single flash card in his hand. Bernice, who was sitting next to him, used a yellow bell. Then, she equipped a repeating crossbow and -1 horse. Well, there was no need to play at all. Just like that, in 2 rounds, Jiang Hai was finished with 5 drops of HP. Jiang, you're playing too badly. Daliana, who was the loyal minister this time, looked at Jiang Hai helplessly. Because it was a 6-person game, there was a master, a concubine, a loyal minister, and a traitor. Unfortunately, she really couldn't win. It's because my cards are bad. You don't understand. Forget it. Go back to sleep. Jiang Hai said helplessly as he looked at the pile of cards in front of him. Why am I so unlucky today? Jiang Hai smacked his lips. He felt that he was a little too miserable. It was said that success in love and failure in gambling, and when one was especially unlucky, it actually represented success in some aspects. For example, at this time, Jiang Hai didn't know, in an apartment in Boston. Peter Walter was looking at Faraday Kirk in front of him with an ashen face. This damn guy, he took my money and didn't do anything for me. Although his face was even uglier at this time, it wasn't a reason for me to let him go. Mr. Walter, I really don't have a way. If there was a little way to mess with Jiang Hai and Winthrop, would do it without hesitation, but I really don't have a way. Now, the whole state is waiting for him to pay the taxes next year. Under such circumstances, I can't touch him at all. Faraday Kirk looked at the ashen Peter Walter in front of him and pleaded. He didn't know that Jiang Hai was so powerful. Mr. Kirk, I think you're mistaken about one thing. I'm not listening to your complaints. I just want results. Peter Walter gently tapped the handle of the chair under his butt and said with a gloomy face. I really have no way. I can double your money back to you. If you want to sue me, then go ahead. But when the time comes, I will indeed be guilty of bribery, but you won't be able to escape responsibility. I heard that Mr. Walter is recently running for president of Celanese Company. If there is any bad news at this time, it will also be disadvantageous to Mr. Walter. Looking at Peter Walter in front of him, Faraday Kirk really had no other way. He gritted his teeth. In this case, he could only go all out. Since he threatened him, then he would threaten him back. Let's see who is more afraid of who. Oh, you're threatening me. Well, with a person like you, I guess we won't have a chance to meet in the future. Return the money we gave you 10 times over. If there's a penny less, I'll let you know the consequences. It won't be as simple as going to prison. Hearing that Faraday still dared to threaten him, Peter Walter's eyes narrowed. He subconsciously wanted to kill this guy directly, but considering that this guy lived in the wealthy area of Boston, and that he was not here to create a case, he took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. 10 times. Hearing Peter Walter's words, Faraday Kirk was in a dilemma. He had received a total of $10,000 from Faraday. 10 times was $2 million. He had only earned a total of $2 million over the years, and this was including the villa under his feet. If he had to pay back 10 times, then he would really be back to square one. But if he did not pay, he might really have to go to prison to reflect. And most importantly, Peter Walter did not give him a chance to refute. After he finished speaking, he had already stood up and left Faraday Kirk's house. Walking out of the wealthy area, he returned to the hotel he was staying in Boston. They had long left Winthrop because all the townspeople knew that it was because of these people that Augustine and the others embarked on the path of confrontation with Jiang Hai. They even punished Augustine, let alone the townspeople. Therefore, in addition to living in Jiang Hai's villa, they couldn't buy anything. From cigarettes and lighters to food and ingredients, they couldn't buy anything. The reason why Jiang Hai let them continue to live in his seaside villa was because he wanted to buy something. It was mainly because Azalina was monitoring them. But now, they had no choice but to move to Boston a few days ago. When Walter returned to the hotel, he heard waves of angry shouts and curses coming from his room. At around 9:00 that night, a man with Walter's group left the hotel. He went to the South District of Boston. At around 10:00 in the evening, he went from 1 person to 10 people. These people drove to the port of Boston. After renting a boat there, they went to Jiang Hai's manor by sea. Big brother, are we really going to cause trouble for Jiang Hai? At around 1:00 in the morning, they drove the boat to the outskirts of Jiang Hai's territory. One of the young men whispered to the middle-aged man beside him with some hesitation. "What's wrong? Are you afraid?" Hearing his words, the middle-aged man raised his eyebrows and said with some arrogance, "I'm not afraid. Think about it. That's Jiang Hai. Even a guy like Billy fell in his hands. I heard that those people's entire families were killed." Hearing what the middle-aged man said, the young man said with some hesitation, "There's no evidence to show that those people were done by Jiang Hai. It's very likely that Billy offended a lot of people in the past, so as soon as he fell, his family was killed by other gangs. Don't be suspicious." Hearing this, another young man said with a smile. It was obvious that he was not afraid at all. "But, can we do it? I heard that the defense of Jiang Hai's house is quite terrifying." But what this person said didn't make the young man let down his guard. He said to the people around him with a hesitant expression, "That's why we're taking the sea route this time. A frontal assault isn't our style." Hearing his words, the employer sitting at the front spoke. After that, he turned his head and looked at the people behind him. "I'll reiterate the goal of tonight's battle. You can't kill or kidnap Jiang Hai, or people who have an important relationship with Jiang Hai. These 2 girls, one is called Daliana, and the other is called Marian. They are Jiang Hai's nominal daughters. Of course, I don't know if they are his mistresses, but their relationship should be closest to Jiang Hai. What we need to do is to kidnap the 3 of them, at least one of them, understand?" Looking at the people in front of him, the employer said with a serious face. Hearing his words, everyone nodded. This was also the reason why they were willing to accept this order. It was just kidnapping, not killing. This was the best result. If they really killed the people on Jiang Hai's side, they would be in big trouble. Since you all understand, let's do it. The time was 3:20 in the morning. At this time, the boat was about half an hour away from Jiang Hai's dock. They could even vaguely see the lights on the dock, but they didn't plan to go to the dock. Instead, they turned directly and touched the forest in the distance. But at this moment, their boat suddenly shook. The propeller that was still moving in the water stopped at this time. The entire boat stopped quietly in the middle of the sea. "What's going on?" Looking at the motionless boat, the employer in front said anxiously. "I don't know. The propeller won't turn. These damn profiteers, they actually gave us defective products." Hearing the employer's words, the person closest to the propeller couldn't help but curse secretly. Hearing his words, many people followed suit. "Fix it quickly, we don't have much time." Looking at the time, it was already past 3:00 in the morning. They didn't have much time left. They had no chance to sneak attack again at dawn, so they must take advantage of this opportunity. Hearing this man's words, the people behind immediately responded and then prepared to pull the propeller out of the water. He did succeed, he successfully pulled the propeller out of the water. But when he pulled it out, his pupils unconsciously dilated. This was because at this time, there was a huge tentacle wrapped around his propeller. What the hell is this? Looking at the huge tentacle, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva as he muttered in a low voice. Tut 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 tut. But before he could figure out what was going on, under the sea, many tentacles broke through the water in an instant and entered their sight. Under their eyes, these tentacles instantly entangled the boat, and then there was a violent shaking, almost throwing them out. Not good, it's a big squid, hurry up and think of a way. Looking at the situation in front of them, most people were confused, but the leader of those people was not the employer, but the middle-aged man. He recognized what this terrifying thing was. But he knew that the squid with this kind of tentacle must not be small. He didn't understand at all. Didn't this thing live in the deep sea? How come Jiang Hai also has one here? Hearing his shout, no one moved, because the shaking was too violent. Who the hell is it? Go to hell. After all, this boat is not a particularly sturdy thing. Soon, the boat will be shaken apart by this guy. At this time, the crisis of survival also overcame fear. One person instantly pulled out the gun on his leg, picked it up directly, and shot one of the tentacles. In an instant, blue blood gushed out. But this bullet is nothing to this squid, even for this tentacle, it's just a drop in the ocean. And this tentacle seemed to have found the direction in an instant. It let go of the boat and instantly rushed to the person who shot it. Without giving him time to react, the tentacle wrapped around this guy's body in an instant. The barbs on the tentacle were like daggers, directly piercing through this guy's clothes, and blood instantly flowed all over the tentacle and the cabin. Clay. Seeing their comrade being stabbed, many people unfastened their seat belts, preparing to save their comrade. But unfortunately, the tentacle didn't give them a chance. It exerted force in an instant, pulling the chair the person was sitting on directly and dragging it into the sea together with it. After they heard a scream, there was no sound outside, only the boat was constantly shaking like a boat in a storm. It was about to fall apart. Seeing this, everyone looked at the middle-aged man and the employer. Abandon the boat. Gritting his teeth, the middle-aged man knew that although it was safe to stay on the boat, if the boat was broken, they would also be finished. After he and the employer looked at each other, he issued such an order. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, everyone stood up for the first time, unfastened their seat belts, took some things they needed, and jumped into the sea. As soon as they entered the water, everyone swam to the other side like crazy, but they did not notice that it was really safe to enter the water. If they had night vision at this time, if they could see the situation under the sea at this time, they probably wouldn't say so. As these people swam desperately to the shore, some huge figures gradually appeared under them. With a flash of a black figure, the next second, a black figure instantly rushed up from under the water. It didn't give these people any chance or hope at all. It directly went from the bottom to the top, and in an instant, it bit a person's waist and rushed out of the water with an impact. This is. Looking at the huge figure in front of them and their companion who was directly bitten in half in midair without even having time to scream, everyone was dumbfounded. They did not understand why this was happening. Chapter 632. Boom! With a loud bang, the giant beast fell into the sea again, but one of their companions was missing. Feeling the rain of blood around them, they were completely stunned. Their eyes were filled with despair. Swim quickly, swim quickly. If you don't want to become food, swim quickly. It was too dark and they couldn't see clearly what was rushing up, but it seemed to be a shark. The leader reacted the fastest and immediately called everyone to swim to the shore. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, these people reacted and immediately began to swim to the shore. However, they were still too slow. At this time, the other big fish also launched an attack. Although Big Fool's wife wasn't as big as Big Fool, she wasn't small either. She caught up with a person behind and instantly bit the person's flapping foot into her mouth. As this person kept screaming, Everyone watched helplessly as he was dragged into the water by Big Fool's wife and never appeared again. This made these people even more terrified. It was said that human potential was unlimited. After 3 of their teammates died, the remaining 7 people might have never swum so fast in their lives. They swam desperately to the shore. However, the big fish weren't just Big Fool and Big Fool's wife. At this moment, a figure emerged from the sea. Although this figure was much smaller than the previous 2, it was equally deadly. It didn't give its target any chance at all. Its sharp beak instantly pressed against a person's back. Before this person was stabbed into the sea, he saw clearly what attacked him. It was a dolphin, but didn't they say that dolphins were humans' friends? Why would it attack him? In fact, he was thinking too much. Humans would hurt each other, let alone animals. If humans placed their hopes on the premise that animals wouldn't hurt them, it would be too sad. Swim quickly, swim quickly. Listening to the continuous screams in his ears, the leader had no other choice but to shout for them to swim quickly. The monsters under the sea were not something they could fight against. Other than swimming quickly, they were at a loss. Even if they had guns on them, against these monsters, what use were guns in the sea? Moreover, it was still night. This was a good time for them to launch a sneak attack. It was also a good time for these guys to launch a sneak attack. However, even if they used all their strength, they still lost people one by one. When the leader swam to the shore, only the employer was left. The 8 men he brought had all been buried in this sea. As soon as he came ashore, he didn't have time to celebrate the rest of his life. The first thing he did was to grab the guy's collar. It was all because of this guy that the 8 young men died here. Don't say those useless things. I'll raise the original price by 5 times. Now, we have no chance to retreat. But before the leader could roar, the employer had already slapped his hand away. While gasping for breath, he said helplessly. He didn't know that Jiang Hai's sea would raise these monsters. Isn't he raising fish in the sea? How could he raise fish? The fish he raised were not enough for these guys to eat, okay? You bastard. Hearing his words, although the leader really wanted to beat him up, he was right. Now was not the time for internal strife. They had no way out. He threw him to the ground hard. He stood up again and observed the situation in front of him. At this time, because they were escaping for their lives, the place where they landed was the closest land to them. This was already the border of Jiang Hai's manor. The electrified iron wire was there. If they wanted to leave, they would have to go through the electric current. Otherwise, they would have to wade in the water. But now, they would not go into the water even if they were beaten to death. There were 2 ways to go to Jiang Hai's place. One was to walk along the beach, but this would be discovered by the people on night watch at the dock. The sound just now was so loud that the people on the dock had probably noticed it. The gains did not make up for the losses. Then there was only one other way left, which was to go through the forest in front of them without being noticed. The 2 looked at each other. Without saying much, they had already made up their minds. After taking a break, they looked at the time. Unknowingly, it was already 3:40 in the evening. There was not much time left before dawn. They had to speed up. They sorted out their equipment. Food, water, and so on. They had been abandoned on the ship just now. After all, the ship had been reduced to pieces and was pulled into the sea by the monster. At this time, they only had a pistol with 15 bullets in it and a tactical dagger. Although there were not many things, they had to try their luck. Holding the pistol, they walked into the forest together. When they were outside, there was still the moon and the stars in the sky. But when they walked into the forest, the moon and the stars disappeared. Because it snowed last night, the snow melted in the sun and froze at night, so the forest ground was not very good to walk on. It was very slippery. The pace of the two's advance was somewhat affected. While quietly sneaking into the forest, they were constantly looking around vigilantly. There were sea monsters in Jianghai's waters, who knows what kind of things are in this forest. In fact, they were right to be careful. Because just as they entered the forest, a pair of green eyes quietly opened. Then, a huge figure slowly walked out from the depths of the forest. The thick pads on its feet allowed it to step on the ground without making any sound. The distance between the two of them was getting closer and closer. Finally, when the two of them reached the center of the forest, the three of them met. But unfortunately, the prey did not realize that it was being watched at this time. I say, the situation doesn't seem right. Why is it so quiet all of a sudden? Looking around, the employer couldn't help but stop for a moment and whisper to the leader beside him. After the leader heard his words, he also listened carefully. Damn, I was almost fooled by you. It's November now. Insects and other things have died long ago. The birds that should have left have all left. How can it not be quiet? But after listening for a long time, the leader who didn't hear anything couldn't help but curse at the employer and leave first. Hearing his words, the employer was also stunned for a moment. Yes, he seemed to be thinking too much, but just as he laughed self-deprecatingly and was about to say something, a sudden gust of wind blew. In the next second, he felt a huge force from behind, pushing him to the ground. Then, he felt a sharp pain in the back of his head, and he couldn't feel anything else. After hearing this voice, the leader standing in front of him couldn't help but subconsciously widen his eyes and turn his head around. But when he looked back again, he didn't see the humanoid shadow, but only the shadow of a huge beast. At this time, the beast was lying on the employer's body, constantly gnawing on something. As if feeling his gaze, the beast also raised its head. Its pair of emotionless eyes stared at the person in front of it. Seeing its gaze, the leader here was already scared out of his wits. He had already forgotten that he still had a gun in his hand. The first thing he did was to run towards the depths of the forest. The beast followed behind him at a leisurely pace. After running for an unknown amount of time, the man ran into a pool in the forest. At this time, the giant beast also blocked him here. Looking at the giant beast in front of him and the pool behind him, the man was somewhat stunned. It's over, I'm dead. This thought kept washing the middle-aged man's heart. He was about to collapse. But at this moment, he suddenly felt his hand tighten. He remembered that he still had a gun. Thinking of this, he directly picked up the gun and shot at the vague figure in front of him without saying a word. Bang! The gunshot startled the giant beast, but after all, it had night vision. When he raised the gun, it had already made a dodging action, so this shot only startled it and didn't hurt it. But with this thing, it was a lot more afraid. Seeing that the giant beast no longer moved forward, the middle-aged man here didn't continue to shoot. At this time, he only had 14 bullets left. He had to use them sparingly. Otherwise, even if he didn't die, he would have to spend his next life in prison, so he had to find a way to escape from here. Go away, get out of the way, get out of the way. Looking at the giant beast's slightly fearful eyes, well, he could only see its eyes. The middle-aged man kept shouting. It seemed that the giant beast really understood his words. After hearing what he said, it really slowly retreated until it disappeared into the forest. Watching the giant beast retreat, the middle-aged man sat on the ground powerlessly. He didn't expect that tonight would be so terrifying. He thought of many possibilities. His people and Jianghai's gunfight, his people's success, his people's failure, and even the police came to kill him. He thought of all these, but he didn't think that his people would fall into the hands of some animals. Whether it was animals in the sea or on land, it was too scary. This Jianghai, he is a madman. He is a pure madman. How can a normal person raise these things? Sitting on the ground powerlessly, he kept cursing, as if cursing Jiang Hai at this time would make his mood better. But he didn't notice that while he was angrily scolding Jiang Hai, something that looked like a piece of dead wood slowly floated out of the water behind him. The crocodile also had night vision, and its pair of eyes were emitting a faint green light. It slowly floated behind the guy who kept cursing its owner. In an instant, the giant crocodile shot out of the water. When the middle-aged man in front heard the movement behind him, he reacted immediately. He wanted to look back, but unfortunately, he only saw a big bloody mouth. After the gun in his hand unconsciously fired a few bullets, the whole forest returned to a state of tranquility. The wind blew, carrying a fishy smell, but he didn't know if it was the smell of blood or the sea. "Boss, did you shoot last night?" 3 hours later, when Jiang Hai went for a run, he happened to pass by the dock, but he was stopped by Eleanor Cece, who was on duty last night. She looked at Jiang Hai with some doubts and asked, "Last night? I didn't." Thinking back, he was the only one who slept at home last night. He didn't even fire the gun, let alone a real gun. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at Cece strangely. "That's really strange. I heard some gunshots last night, but after turning on the sonar, I didn't find anything. It's really strange." Hearing that it wasn't Jiang Hai, Eleanor Cece couldn't help but be a little puzzled. "It shouldn't be like this. Hey, it could also be from outside. I didn't receive an alarm here." Waving his hand, since there was nothing, Jiang Hai didn't care. Almost everyone in the United States has a gun, and it's not impossible for some gunshots to be heard at night. In the past, Jiang Hai had also encountered some people who drank too much. They would drive while shooting at the sky. When he first came here, he was woken up by these people. In his mind, it might have been the same thing last night. Is that so? Okay. Although there were still some doubts, nothing really happened. After hesitating for a moment, Eleanor Cece nodded to show that she understood because she had encountered what Jiang Hai said before. "By the way, how's the situation at the fish farm recently?" Looking at Eleanor Cece, who had accepted his explanation, Jiang Hai also smiled and asked him the question he was most concerned about. "This is a big question. Recently, the fish have grown very well, and the water temperature is higher than last year. It seems that we will have a bumper harvest next year." When it comes to fish, Eleanor Cece is much more excited. After all, these are his insurance. Jiang Hai is a magical person. Edward Anderson told them this before. After they saw the income of the cowboys, these fishermen were anxious, but at the same time, they were full of confidence in Jiang Hai. They believed that as long as they did well, their future income would not be much higher than that of the cowboys, just like the ordinary fishermen and cowboys, but at least they would not earn less than them. His heart itched at the thought of earning dozens or even millions of dollars a year. It seems that he has unknowingly entered the ranks of the high-income group. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but grin. With such a boss, what else could he ask for? Chapter 633. It's so boring. Sitting on the recliner that was moved into the house, Jiang Hai was playing with his phone and reading a novel. His eyes glanced at the sunny day outside, hesitating whether or not he should find something to do. Otherwise, it would be really boring. Winter in the north was like this. There was really nothing to do. If someone heard Jiang Hai say this, they would probably say, "Then you can go out and play in the snow, build a snowman, have a snowball fight, etc." If someone said this, Jiang Hai would probably spit out a mouthful of salt soda. Build a snowman and have a snowball fight? Was that something an adult should do? Wasn't it boring? Also, where did the snow come from? Where was the snow? It was only the beginning of November. This was only the beginning of winter. Sometimes, there would be some small snowflakes at night, but they were just small snowflakes without any feathers. They would melt by noon in the day. The beginning of winter could only be described with one word: cold. It was hard to get used to. In this kind of weather, even if Jiang Hai wanted to go out and play, he had nowhere to go. Recently, the young people in Winthrop were either going to school or staying at home. Who would be crazy enough to go out and suffer from the cold? Even if they wanted to go out and play, they would go to places like bars. But everyone knew that Jiang Hai did not go to bars. But now, he was really depressed. He was like an old man, lying on his jade recliner, looking at the sky and his phone from time to time. He had nothing to do. The time in the United States was the opposite of that in China, especially in the East. There was a 13-hour time difference. When Jiang Hai woke up in the morning, it was already dark. When he was the most idle around noon, Wuxia was the time when she slept the best. He was also embarrassed to call his friends to go to the bathroom at this time, so he really had nothing to do. Actually, did Jiang Hai really have nothing to do? Actually, that was not the case. For example, there was a lot of work in the cowshed, but he felt that it was smelly, so he did not want to go. There were also a lot of zhuji by the sea, so he could go out to sea. He felt that it was cold, so he did not want to go. Therefore, when he stayed at home, he really did not have much to do. Winter in the north was like this. When there was no work, it was indeed quite boring. It was unlike spring, summer, and autumn when he could go out to play, but there was nothing to play with now. Jiang, do you eat tanghulu? Just as Jiang Hai was thinking about what he should do, Xiaoya ran up from downstairs in a pair of slippers. She was holding 2 candied haws in her hands. These candied haws were made by Jiang Hai last time. These days, Jiang Hai would put these candied haws into the freezer during the day and take them out to freeze at night. Therefore, the taste was quite good. After receiving a bunch of candied haws from Xiaoya, Jiang Hai ate happily. Speaking of which, these candied haws had been stored for a long time. The candied haws were sold around March to June every year. Jiang Hai's candied haws were left behind at that time. Although they were frozen and did not spoil, the taste was somewhat different. Next year, no matter what, I have to set up the greenhouse. I am not used to eating stale food. While eating the candied haws, Jiang Hai thought to himself. However, while he was thinking, he glanced at Xiaoya who was beside him. Then Jiang Hai sighed helplessly. Although it was winter, the weather outside was below 10 degrees, which was only a few degrees. However, the temperature in Jiang Hai's manor was very high. The geothermal heat in Jiang Hai's manor kept the temperature at 26 degrees. It was not particularly hot, but it was definitely not cold. Because of this, the women in Jiang Hai's villa were dressed very freely. Delina and Marian liked to wear pajamas with 2 layers of tulle. Although they did not wear anything inside, at least they had clothes and pants. Moreover, Jiang Hai did not have any bad intentions towards them, so these did not matter. And the most important thing was that when Jiang Hai told them, they would listen. This was the most important point. However, Bernice, Xiaoya, and Azalina were a bit excessive. Among them, Bernice liked to walk back and forth in the house every day. She did not wear a vest inside. As soon as she bent down, Jiang Hai could clearly see everything that should not be seen. Her lower body was a pair of athletic tight 3/4 pants, which tightened her thighs and buttocks. Azalina was more direct. She directly wore a short-sleeved t-shirt that looked like Jiang Hai's. Jiang Hai was very strong. He was more than 190 centimeters tall and weighed more than 260 kilograms. Of course, all of his muscles were very dense. Even so, his arms were still thick and his chest was big. He had to buy a 2-meter XXXL t-shirt. Azalina wore his shirt. One side of the collar was on her neck, while the other side could even completely expose her shoulders. Sometimes, she would wear a pair of underpants, sometimes, she would wear nothing. She just walked in the house in such a cool manner. However, if someone knocked on the door, she would instantly return to the room. If she did not expose her shoulders, her ferocious cleavage would be exposed. Jiang Hai did not want to see it. Among these people, Xiaoya was considered relatively normal. However, she might have been led astray by them recently. For example, today, Xiaoya only wore a lace tulle nightgown. Although it was called a nightgown, it did not even cover her thighs. She did not wear anything on her upper body. After giving Jiang Hai the candied haws, she directly sat on the wooden recliner opposite Jiang Hai with her legs bare. Her clothes fell down, revealing her upper body. Jiang Hai could clearly see the two round lumps and some small things on them that could not be described. Looking down, he could clearly see the underpants with Winnie the Pooh printed on it. Jiang Hai was a little uneasy. Especially those two long legs, which were white and tender, swaying back and forth in front of him. Those little toes, which looked like they were carved out of jade, were also mischievously moving to show off their owner. He was in a very good mood now. "Cough, I say, why don't you wear more when you go back?" Looking at Xiaoya's appearance, Jiang Hai could not help but feel a little depressed. "No, I feel that this is just right. If it's cold, I'll rub in your arms for a while." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya smiled and then said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai could not help but roll his eyes at her. "Where did you learn all these from? Don't always learn those useless things from your sister. If you have time, you should study your dishes more." Looking at Xiaoya, Jiang Hai looked at her unhappily and said to her. "Oh? Is there anything you want to eat recently? Tell me, I'll make it." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya could not help but raise her eyebrows, and then said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's attention also shifted from her body to food. Indeed, for people like Jiang Hai, eating might be the only existence that could compete with women. He felt that the next time, if he could not control himself, he would just think about eating. He did not know if it was reliable, but this was worth a try. Now that Xiaoya mentioned food, Jiang Hai also remembered. "Right, I want to eat soup dumplings. Can you make them?" Since Xiaoya's illness had been cured, Jiang Hai would occasionally get up in the morning to make some breakfast. Usually, lunch and dinner were taken care of by Xiaoya. Xiaoya was really talented in this area. In the past, she only knew how to make Chinese dishes. Now, because there was no pork or river fish, she made more Western dishes. She also combined a lot of Eastern and Western dishes, which made the taste even better. So usually, Jiang Hai did not have any requirements for food, but now that she mentioned it, he would just say it and see. "Soup dumplings? Is it from Su province?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya also asked a little strangely. I don't know. I only know that it seems to be from Bao Qingtian's side." After hesitating, Jiang Hai said to Xiaoya. In fact, soup dumplings were a very ancient food in Wuxia. It had a history of more than 1,000 years. Legend has it that the earliest time was during the Northern Song dynasty. It was not a particularly noble dish. It was already sold on the streets and in the market. At that time, it was called soup dumplings or soup dumplings. The most famous place of origin was the state where fireworks occurred in March. During the Northern Song dynasty, Wang Lu, one of the 72 shops in Dongjing, Bianliang, produced and sold cave plum blossom dumplings. It was this kind of dumpling that was known as the best in Dongjing. After the Northern Song dynasty, soup dumplings were passed down in Kaifeng. It was not until the 1920s that it spread out from the first dessert shop. This kind of dumpling could be found in many places. The most famous one was Kaifeng, followed by Jiangnan, Shihang, Nandu, and so on. These were the places where these buns were produced. So now, everyone knew that these buns were mostly produced in Jiangnan, not the place where they were produced. So now Xiaoya asked if it was the one in Su province. Jiang Hai thought for a while, and it seemed that there was not much difference. Anyway, it is just soup dumplings. After hesitating for a while, Jiang Hai said to Xiaoya. He was also not sure where this kind of dumpling came from. But he was sure that it was not from Bing City, even though there was a restaurant in Bing City that sold delicious food. Oh, I know. I will give it a try. I had always been doing red case and had never done white case before. After hearing what Jiang Hai said, Xiaoya was also excited. She also wanted to give it a try. The red case and white case that Xiaoya mentioned was a term used by chefs. The red case was mainly used to stir-fry vegetables, and the white case was used to cook staple foods like desserts, rice, steamed buns, dumplings, etc. All staple foods were under the white case category. Other than that, there was also water case, which was to wash vegetables and do odd jobs. Nowadays, it was not called water case, but odd jobs. After deciding to do it, Xiaoya finished the candied hawthorn in her hand and quickly ran downstairs to study it. It was not easy to make soup dumplings. The top, the broth, and the hardness of the noodles were all very particular. After about an hour, Xiaoya asked Jiang Hai to go downstairs to try. After Jiang Hai went downstairs, he saw a basket of dumplings on the table in the living room. This basket of dumplings did not look as authentic as the dumplings that Jiang Hai had eaten before, but it looked good. At this moment, Bernice, Azalina, Daliana, Marian, and Xiaoya were sitting around the table, looking at the basket of dumplings in front of them. They wanted to try but did not dare to. When they saw Jiang Hai coming down, they all looked at him. "Didn't you try it?" Looking at the basket of dumplings, it looked really good, so Jiang Hai asked them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girls shook their heads and looked at Jiang Hai expectantly. What kind of filling? Looking at their appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help retreating a bit. But the smell of these buns was really quite good. He couldn't help it. After hesitating for a moment, he picked up one and asked Xiaoya. Fresh meat and shrimp. Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to try, Xiaoya could not help but say to him carefully. This was a very normal ingredient. Jiang Hai looked at the dumpling in front of him and hesitated for a moment, then gently bit into it and drank the soup inside. When the soup entered his mouth, besides being hot, Jiang Hai's eyes could not help but brighten. He had to admit that the soup was very good. Xiaoya should have made the ingredients for the chicken soup, mixed with the fragrance of the meat and the sweetness of the shrimp. At least for this soup, Jiang Hai had to give it 10 points. In fact, it was also understandable. Not to mention the chicken soup, Jiang Hai's pork was the meat of the fragrant pig that he imported from the country. The shrimp were also Arctic sweet shrimp, all of them were fresh. Moreover, they grew up eating spirit chi plants, so it would be strange if the soup was not fresh. After drinking the soup, Jiang Hai threw the dumpling into his mouth. When he bit into it, he could feel the firmness of the meat, the taste of the chicken soup, and the texture of 2 shrimp stacked together. Jiang Hai's eyes suddenly narrowed. This taste was too good. Did you succeed? Xiaoya looked at Jiang Hai's appearance and couldn't help but ask worriedly. Success. When Jiang Hai heard Xiaoya's words, he directly picked up the steamer and ran upstairs. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice, Daliana, and Ma An also ran up. They had not eaten yet. Seeing Jiang Hai throw the dumplings into his mouth one by one, it would be strange if they were not anxious. Let them snatch it. I remember that you still have a lot of dumplings. Let's cook them. Looking at the 4 people fighting over the dumplings, Azalina walked to Xiaoya's side and looked at Xiaoya, who also wanted to try. She patted her shoulder and whispered. Hearing her words, Xiaoya smiled and nodded. She almost forgot that she still had dumplings, so the two slipped into the kitchen and started cooking again. At this time, a sports car also arrived in front of Jiang Hai's manor. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.